So believe me, I have so much compassion for the suffering. But what I have done to keep on going is to get very intellectual about this. And so if I come across as a cold-hearted bitch, well, yeah, I am. I really am not, if you get to know me personally, but I put up that persona so that protects me.
This is a tough situation we're in, and sometimes if you're going to get anywhere, you have to get tough about things. I agree.
So I look into the structure, and I look into the groups that I was told that when I walked into my local court, it was obvious within a year that they were running a scam. And I thought it was just a little local get me into counseling scam. And then I found out that there were groups, and they were basically running under fatherhood. And this is in the United States. They came into prominence under welfare reform, where they reformulated the welfare funding, and they called it fatherhood, and it was under the Office of Child Support Enforcement, and they reformulated how they would process things, and they would make it about custody instead. And so in doing so, they put in a program that would assign people to your divorce. If you filed for support, to your custody case, and it would align the custody with support. And they put in what they call family court services. So it was called mediation, supervised visits, counseling, and a few others. But they basically are interactive, and my understanding of mediation is not exactly what they're doing. There are different forms, so each one takes different forms. So this is how they got entrenched in the United States. And I'm going to be very simplistic about what I'm telling you.
Can I just interrupt, because I just have something to give on this, and I'm sorry to interrupt you. Are you aware of a gentleman called Matt Dunkley? I believe all this started when he was in the education system in America, and he met with Mr. Blair and the president in Blair House. And as a result of that, this is how all of this childcare and the situation we're now living in has come from a point of. Now, I have documents from the education system that put Matt Dunkley in this position, where he met the president and he met Mr. Blair. And I think he came back with Mr. Blair and Mr. Dunkley, and this is how we've now got this situation in England, which you had in America.
Okay.
Well.
The American Department of Education is involved. So this is why we're wonderfully talking to each other, so that we can see where they connect. I can't say that I know everything, but that's a wonderful connection to pursue. So what we're going to do is get my framework, and then we're going to move where your framework works with mine, and how we can each learn even more, and how there's definitely connections. So when they got in the United States, the group that they used was called Fathers' Rights. Now, if I generalize that, I get good men like you getting angry at me right away, but I don't want to make you angry, because you understand that's just an organizing function. And the Fathers' Rights does have people and names, and they were the government insiders, and they're the lobbyists, and they're very powerful in money. And so they organized, and they work with other groups, but the Fathers' Rights have that pedophilia underneath. And anything that I'm telling you about a group is not 100% every member, but I'm saying that there are some very dark people within these groups, and this is how they operate within the subterranean level of these groups, as you know. And I can't say that I'm an expert on child welfare. In America, it's two separate functions, but yet they interact with each other. And I know in the UK, it's pretty much under the child welfare, which is CAFCIS. But so I was going to talk about changing the narrative, because I'm very anti the domestic violence establishment. I am very, I could write a 300-page book explaining the wool that's being pulled over your eyes, and how their narrative is not truthful. So I'm going to try to touch on that, but I'm going to talk about, we need a new narrative that talks about children. Maybe I'm not an expert on how to bring in the men, and so maybe having these dialogues can help, but I don't want men to take offense at what I say. It's just, this is my starting point, and this is what I know, but I'm willing to adapt to my speech.
I would never take offense.
Okay, I do want you.
The only thing I'd like to get across, and I have done in these other meetings, that both parents are affected by this, and we're finding that there is a divide caused by social services to take the kids away.
Yes.
And we're never going to make this work if we fight. We've got to find common ground, and this is something I've been trying to do. There's a lot of people that want to say this is a feminist situation, and this is men oppressing women. It's not. It's about a system that's not working.
Yes. I prefer to call it maltreatment, and I look at it in general, like societal also. When this first started in the United States in 1998, it was heavily geared towards getting men custody, and it has morphed. It's been 25 years, and it was basically a reaction to the domestic violence, which also had gotten this huge pot of money. I think it was $5 billion, and their premise was that women should automatically get children. They wrote these model custody codes, a statute, which is law, that they were planning on running around the country and getting it passed. And it was going to be a great, women were going to get custody, men were going to be put in jail, but they were still going to pay the rent and give the support. So it was kind of a dream world to begin with. But so the program's built along these ideologies. So you have that domestic violence ideologies. Cops were going to come into your house. They were going to automatically know who was the guilty person, and they were going to take them away. And we know that policemen do not act that way. Many policemen have violent homes. They're bad. That's why they get into those positions of power, so they can use them not only to abuse their wives, but to abuse the community. There's a lot of connections between abusing your family, physical violence, and other types of violence, and what goes on in the community. And the domestic violence organizations never made that leap, even though research exists, but they select what research they want. They throw out very good research. So I don't want to get too deep into what I know, but there's research called typologies of male batterers, and I've broken it down into something simplistic. But there are reasons why people abuse. There are reasons, like some people abuse just because they've learned it in the home, but other people do it because they have a mental disorder. They're not socially, and there's other reasons because they love themselves too much. But there are ways to stop it, like a reward and punishment can stop the abuse. And that was never taken from the knowledge of how it was being used against women, and it was never taken and applied in other situations, like say where you have a businessman who abuses his employees, or a very rich man who abuses the society in general. And when I look at the problem, that's how I frame it. I want to move my knowledge of maltreatment into more of a societal scheme. And what we've created by not looking this as a person to person, a structural thing, is we've created a society that is global and elitist. And we have an elitist class that is severely, severely harming the rest of us. And they've created these systems that are predatorial, and they run in the communities, and they take the most disenfranchised and the most vulnerable, and they're basically stealing their children, stealing their money, using them for profit, cheap labor, etc. So they're putting the children, the residential care is horrific. So that's the framework. That's where I want to get. If I'm talking about narrative, that's where I want to go. And I want to go away from that domestic violence. I was abused in the home. And I understand some of it is so horrific that maybe you can't get beyond that. But if I can, so I'm dealing with my intellectual level. So when I first learned that there are actually organizations who are operating this, our government used to tell us, no, this fatherhood stuff, that's not about custody. Our legislators would go and we'd say, they're running this program. Oh, no, they don't do that. So I believe that it just needed to be organized in a simplistic manner. And that I wasn't going to win my case locally. It wasn't going to happen. I did appeals. I know the law. So I thought I could publish a book, and I really didn't think I could do that. But I did, and I was proud of myself. And what happened is two domestic violence people, Joan Mayer and Dr. Leora Rosen, who wound up being the grant administrator, and they took my work, and I thought that they were going to present a more credentialed view of my work to the legislators, and we thought that they had done that, but they didn't. They really just got themselves more money. So I find them to be useless, and I continue to expand my knowledge and my understanding. And my first book, I really didn't understand AFCC very much. I knew they were one of the groups that was running this, but now I have a much greater understanding. I've collected AFCC conference brochures, and I understand the training, and I've got AFCC books, and I've read the research. And so AFCC is basically, it's one of the organizations that organizes and works within family court. And so they administer the services, they administer the social services with the help of judges and lawyers. And AFCC started in Los Angeles, where Hollywood is, and they are international now. They're very big in the United States, and they've moved across different areas and gotten embedded in different areas. AFCC has a very close relationship with fathers' rights people and the religious right. And so you will find some of the overlaps in that. And the fathers' rights originally, and we're talking 98 when welfare was passed, they were into shared custody. So a lot of AFCC stuff, it's all geared around what they call shared custody, and they call it, they're going to solve any conflicts where you two can't share your custody. And so you're getting a divorce, and right away, the profiteers, they make a lot of money off of their services. If they see you have money, look out. They will charge you hundreds of dollars for 1 hour of counseling. supervised visits go for, they can go to 150. I mean, they were charging Britney Spears $20,000. So, but $75 for somebody who makes a very low income is not unheard of. And so if you want to see your child for 3 hours a day, one day during the week, you're paying $300. So if we look at it as a profit system, what we see is they've set up within every community, they've set up these groups that do these things. They counsel, they give supervised visits, they monitor your case. So they need victims, I hate to call it, but they need clients. And so when you go into court, what you don't realize is that you're basically being assessed for which services they can fit you into so that they can bill you, or even what a terrific job to get $60,000, $70,000. And I'm in the US, so the money's different, but you're getting a very decent income for being a social worker, as opposed to, if I had to work in a shop or do some manual labor. Some of the male jobs are very exhausting and not even good for your health. So I can be a social worker and I can tell people how to raise their kids, or, I can sit there and monitor you through a supervised visit, and I can make fun of you like the post office people. I can come into your house and start picking at you. So that's a wonderful thing. And there are lots of people who are doing this now. And, they don't really want to deal with a dangerous situation. So they're filtering people that way. Welfare reform also set up within the United States something called pregnancy centers. Part of welfare reform was to teach women that they should have the babies and give them up for adoption. You shouldn't have sex. It's called abstinence program. So they were teaching people not to have sex before getting married. So that set up these pregnancy centers. So if you did happen to get married and you were young, or get pregnant and you were young, you go to a pregnancy center and they give you counseling. And what they're trying to do without telling you is convince you to have the child and give it up for adoption. So that's part of one of their adoption schemes. If you're vulnerable, they find out about you, you're a perfect case for them to bring in child protection. That's what it's called in US. So then they can use the government to take away your child, the family court. So a lot of these people are members of AFCC, and they have standard practices that they use within the court itself, but also these community groups or these private counseling centers, supervised visits, treatment centers. So AFCC is the group, and it's called the American Family and Conciliation Courts, AFCC.net. AFCC.net, I believe that's their website. And they are the main group that trains, and they have various ways that they train the staff, the people who work within these organizations. They have a yearly custody conference within the United States. They have an international custody conference, which I believe are every 2 years. They've had them in Australia and I think England, New Zealand, they're big. They have what they call local chapter conferences. I think they've got at least 4 going on a year in different areas. They'll have joint conferences with the American Bar, which is the lawyers, and AAML, which is matrimonial lawyers, American Association Matrimonial. They have another conference that they're having with the judges groups, who we identified as also working in the UN and working in influencing a lot of England's protocols. That's what I call them. So, you know, how things are going to be standardized, how you're going to be processed, how you're going to be treated. This is all being created out of AFCC and their myriad of friends groups, and they publish on it. So AFCC prints a journal a couple times a year called the Family Court, Family Court something with a C. And so this journal, it's private. You get it if you join AFCC, and it publishes all of the research, is high-end research that is published by lawyers, practitioners, psychologists, sociologists, even judges put their names on some of this research. And you can go back decades. It's a lot of research. So they've printed research on how to set up a counseling place in your neighborhood, and judges, how they're telling judges how to do this. So many of the judges have actually began, and they're founders of these centers, counseling centers, supervised centers. So they're board members. So they've been taught how to do that, and they get government grants like startup grants, and they've done that. AFCC taught them how to get what's called judicial immunity. So how do you get immune if you've done something wrong? So they teach them, you know, there are you can get a law passed, you can get what the court set up rules. They're kind of an administrative vehicle. So they teach them how to do it that way. They teach them how to get immunity by precedent, which I believe is it's the legal thing that is most relied upon in the UK, precedent of law. So they teach them how to do that. And then all of a sudden you're immune. AFCC teaches them psychological methods to use on children. I wasn't going to go deeply into it, but I get affected by people's hurt. And I've just heard his story, so I know where he's coming from. So now I'm trying to, what people don't understand, and I don't like to tell them. When your child is taken away, your child is put into a regime, a psychological regime of reprogramming, and they want to change the child's attachment to the person that they're putting that child with. So AFCC teaches them how to do that. And they have psychological processes and psychological words that they use. So we could call it psychobabble, but milieu therapy. So I've identified some of the therapies that the AFCC promulgates and teaches at their conferences and in their research and in their books. Milieu therapy is like where they change the environment, and then they teach the child that, no, this is your environment. They want to get into how the child views the world and themselves, and then they change the child's perspective of that. If the child is saying, I don't want to be abused, and it's the funniest thing, because they'll use abuse to take the child, but then if a child actually says, I'm being abused and don't want to be with this person, then the child is put in a program to be taught to accept the abuse. So it's very selective, and it is the people in charge who are selecting. And then they are, oftentimes they send them to these counseling or treatment centers, and they bill them. and the child is being put through these psychological, I know that if you speak with domestic violence, if you read domestic violence, they often frame it in Richard Gardner, who is the father of parental alienation. They frame it around this parental alienation, in that because that was one of the first forms of this psychological reprogramming, of taking the child from the person who was abusing them and putting them, taking them from the person who wasn't abusing them and putting them with the abuser and teaching them through psychological processes that they would have to accept the abuse and not talk about it to others, not resist it. And so domestic violence and the alienation narrative centers around camps that they sent up, because they would put the children in several days or a week, like a reprogramming facility. They would literally take the child out of school with a court order, of course, and they would fly the child somewhere to a private place that they had gotten a grant to set up. And then they would isolate the child and force the child to be with the person who's abusing them, and use like a reward punishment system to finally get the child to realize that maybe the child realizes, this is my situation, I'm stuck with it, I'm going to put up with it. I have heard of kids who went along with it and got out, but other children are really psychologically reprogrammed to accept this and to be a part of this high level of abuse. But it not only goes on in these alienation forms and camps, this goes on just by having a court order that takes the child away from their parent. So when you take a child from your parent, the parent they're attached to, who's nurtured them, and maybe you're not perfect, but you've done a lot for your child, and they've taken this child based on these bogus, trumped up, I love that word, trumped up. You see, there's a humor to that, using that word, trumped up charges. Then you're reprogramming this child. You can do it in the home, and you can do it through these counseling. So you take the child to a counselor once a week or twice a week. And then, so it's outpatient reprogram, same thing, same exact thing. And yet we don't talk that this is the routine. Anytime you take a child from using CAFCIS, using a court order in any form, you are in the process of reprogramming them and teaching them. It's social engineering, teaching them to accept the new situation, the new person who is going to be in charge of their lives because they're a child. This is the new person who's going to feed you like a dog. You will learn to love the person who has control of your food, your shelter, your schooling. You will learn to go along with it. And that's what's being done to the children. And I wasn't planning to be so hard to people, and I apologize if I've hurt you emotionally by telling you this. But it is, AFCC is the primary group that is promulgating the psychological processes and the legal processes that legitimize this and help them get away with it in government situations. There is no accountability. It covers up for any form of accountability. The minute somebody figures out a way to go after them, 6 months later, AFCC will publish an article telling them how to get around it. And I'm not kidding. maybe I need to calm myself down, but so I know how they're doing it. I'm very familiar with a lot of their main research that tells people how to do this. And so identifying the players is primary. If anybody has a case, you need to identify the players, the operators, the organizations that they operate through. And this is why us coming together is a very good thing, because this is what we're doing. Domestic violence will never do that. They will never tell you that this is all standard operation. You know, and once you're in, and good luck getting out. So I went away. Are people trying to talk with me and ask questions, make comments?
I don't think so. I think we're just listening at the moment.
Okay. If you try to do that, you have to tell me, Natalie.
Mhm.
So this is an AFCC book that tells parenting plan evaluations. This is all high level research. This was published by Oxford Press. So it's got people from Australia, New Zealand. It's very high level research that's been published by AFCC. And if you want to know,
once more, so we can see the title. Sorry, can you show us once more, Doreen?
it is called Parenting Plan Evaluations, Applied Research for the Family Court.
Right.
It is written by three of their big. You get to know AFCC, you get to know who the people are, their operators. They all have affiliations. So they're members of AFCC, but they're often members of other groups also. And they'll run little local counseling centers, things like that. Leslie Drozoid is one of the what they are is their editors. So they compile the research of the other people. Drozoid is out of California. She actually pretends to be an expert in domestic violence. Mostly she calls it intimate partner violence, but she got contracts for the state of California and she did a lot of training for 20 years. Her stuff is, it's very father's rights. I won't go into that today. The other one is Michael Sanini. He's in Canada. They have a lot of AFCC players. Who's the last one? Nancy Olison. So these are three people who actually try to pretend that they're domestic violence experts, but they're all very heavily geared towards treating domestic violence with their psychological services. And it minimizes what happens to the child. It minimizes the harm to the child, and it treats the child. There is a lot of research on a supplantation of alienation, a substitute, a euphemism, which is called gatekeeping. So you will often find that used. That's like a whitewash. The AFCC whitewashes a lot. The research is whitewashed. You'll start with Gardner, and then one of the big players is called Richard Warshak. And so there's a whitewashing system. You get to know that as you get very comfortable with it. If you're reading any of the research, and I've done a lot of it, you need to know the citations. You need to look at the names. You'll get familiar with them. So I know a lot of the names, but America has something, or the United States, they have something called the American Psychological Association. It is the credentialing association. So they print what's called guidelines. So this is how you're supposed to conduct an evaluation. Say you get a great job making hundreds of dollars an hour to evaluate a family. You know, if you get a divorce, you're sent to an evaluator. So you're supposed to use the guidelines. So when I look at the guidelines, they're written in a way, but they're only aspirational. They're written in a way where they sound kind of logical. Well, that sounds nice, sounds reasonable. But then you go to the citations, and that's where the training comes in. Because if I'm going to be an evaluator, I'm going to want to get trained or at least have some knowledge of what I'm doing. So when I'm looking at the citations, this is where I'm getting my knowledge from. So this book is listed in this citation. So if I am an evaluator, this is the book that I'm referring to, or, you know, so the practices, I call it, I just generalize it. I try to simplify. I call it practices. The psychological practices, and there are also legal practices, are in here. That's book number 1. These are playbooks. Everything that's happening to parents, it's written down, it's in playbooks. There's a level, a hierarchy. I'm giving you the top of the hierarchy. Other people will give you, there's one called Screw the Bitch, that's lower level. But I guess I lost the cover for this one, but this is divorce and family mediation. Divorce and family mediation. The copy I have was written in 2004. It's by Folberg. These are 3 of the AFCC top, they were executive directors. So they basically set up the whole scam. Folberg, Jay Folberg, is a lawyer out of California from about 30 years ago. He's a father's rights person. Ann Milne is a woman, and I think she's from the middle of the United States. She wasn't long. She's another one. She pretends to be a domestic violence expert. So she came up with this, what we're going to do in cases of domestic violence, and it's in here. She has a whole article, is get the mediators going to mediate what happens with the kid when you share this child from house to house. So the mediator can tell you what clothes to wear and what the haircut's going to be, and when the child, because you're having domestic violence, you can't figure that out for yourself. So you need the mediator to tell you when to serve dinner and what extracurricular and all these little details of life that you no longer are in charge of, you know, and then they can charge you for that. So these articles, they lay this, it's really funny in a way. There's one that's written by one of the AFCC people, and how they're going to solve domestic violence is they're going to order you to go to the coffee shop, because everybody knows that when you're in a coffee shop, you behave a lot better. And you know, so this is the nonsense. That there's another one that's called power. He writes about the power framework, because domestic violence is an issue of power. And he says, and they do it in this really high level psycho language. Mothering is power, and it's true. You have that power over your child with the attachment. So the social service person that we order you to go to as a mediator, they're going to break that power, believe me, and you're going to pay for it. So another guy, Robert Benjamin, and he's another one out of California. A lot of them come from California. It's a WIFT state. He came up with books on tactics for mediation. Now, mediation is not a gentle and kind thing. Mediation is a coercive, punitive system. If you don't go along, you better watch out. And mediation, as it's used by AFCC practitioners, it is used as a judicial type. They're ordering you what to do, and they often give that judicial power to the mediator, who can be a psychologist, social worker, or some other crazy. We had one here who was an art therapist. She just knew what to do, because I called her up and asked her how she knew, and she just had a feeling. So and I bet in California we've got a lot of them who that's where they're getting their gift from, you know, the universe. So Robert Benjamin, he writes books called Guerrilla Tactics and The Mediator as Trickster. There's another one that we found in Missouri when I was looking, and she does And now they're on YouTube. It's wonderful to watch them. So she has a YouTube called Transformative Mediation, and she's going to teach you how to transform yourself. When you're not getting along, she's going to do it. It's hysterical. They're so, I mean, they're totally wifty. The lowest form of intellectual, and they don't care. It's not even like they don't care about kids. They don't even understand how to raise a child because they hire somebody if they even do have children. You know, you need to get breakfast on the table. And if your child's of school age, what is your main concern? Getting them the best educational possible, you know, and then you need extracurricular activities or some kind of interest where they're not getting into trouble. These people don't worry about that. If I have $200, I'm kind of an upstart. I'm from the inner city. I don't take it from nobody. So I'm paying the lawyer, I forget what I was paying him, a couple $100. Now, I wasn't paying the large amounts that some of them do. And I said to him, you know, I'm paying you and I need to pay for after school. This could pay for a whole summer of summer camp. Boy, did he get mad at me. How dare I? So, you know, they're basically taking the money that you should be giving to your child for educational experiences beyond the school. But even if you want to spend it on tutoring or music lessons, or my kids were in dance, you know, I wanted my children to have a good feeling about their bodies because I was raised in a very religious, you know, they didn't do that. So just, I felt the dance was good. There are reasons why you make the decisions you make, and you could probably explain them if somebody would listen, and they are legitimate reasons. But they won't, they're not listening to that. This is all a structure, you know, that these people are in charge. And I don't know, maybe some people meet ones who are good, and occasionally I hear, oh, this one was good, I was happy with them. Good for you, but that's not where I'm coming from, and that's not what I'm talking about. And you know, I'll basically cut you off. So I actually was told about this book from a UK friend. And this was written by Martha Albert Feynman, who's a legal scholar. She was a feminist legal scholar. She's a brilliant woman. And in 1995, and through her progression, what we find is that the feminists basically threw women to the wolves, to the fathers' rights organizations, the pedophiles. They let them get into the United States government through these fatherhood programs. She knew it was going to happen. She writes it all out. This is not something I'm making up. This woman has given me a lot more insight into the problem and the government endorsement of the problem, and why domestic violence will never address the real issues that are going on, and they're playing these games with the women. How did social services get so heavily involved in our lives? This is not democracy to have a practitioner, a legal person, or a psychologist, or a counselor, or a social worker. This is not democracy. These are all college people. They've got degrees that somehow credential them. They're not credentialed. These are not people who came out of child education. They didn't come out of, you know, really educational, the preschools, like learning what children need to be good people. These are people who come out of this odd behavioral science, social engineering type fields, these punitive. So that needs to be clear. And if we talk to legislators, we need to make those points. The people who built these programs do not know about what is best for children. They don't care about what children need. Children need healthy food. Simple. Children should.
That's my point. The person who built this, Matt Dunkley, was in Victoria, Australia, telling everybody that he burned all the information in the UK that Ofsted could get hold of. Is absolutely unfathomable that a founding person who received an award by the Crown could do this and get away with it and build this system which stinks.
No, this is very good information, though. We know something. We will. My goal is that the children learn that this was done to them, and maybe that's a naive goal, but at this point, I have nothing left. I want the children to know, and I actually have friends who are. I didn't want to get into this. A lot of the children that have become sexualized and have transitioned and they're very sexually confused because they've been molested in some form, and they've been taken from their parent and put into maybe a fostering situation or just with the parent who's a molester. They're transforming, and they're because they've been molested and they've been treated in a sexualized manner. And so I have a friend who her children were molested and they've been rescued. Actually, they're the policeman who rescued them actually adopted them, because God forbid you give them back to the mother. And but she gets to visit them, and her goal, what she does is she goes and she interacts with the now aged out children, and she's telling them, no, this is a program, and she's telling the probation office is in on this, and she says that the line staff, now it's been decades that these programs are in there. She says the line staff don't even understand why the protocols are telling them to do the things that they're doing. And she's telling them because this is how these systems were put into place. And they're learning. So this is a good thing. And I want the children that have been told they're kind of angry, but yet they're also empowered. You shouldn't be sexualizing children, but we are people who don't sexualize children. And what we need to realize is probably that Dunleavy guy you told me about that I did write down, he probably was a pedophile. I think the most extreme people are. I think that maybe not all of them are, but some of them are motivated. Okay, if we go to the FBI and they say money, they call it MICE, money, ideology, compromise, which I got something on you, and ego is what creates people who do crime. Maybe the ideology is the pedophilia. They really believe they have a right. They believe it's expressing their love. A lot of them maybe there are different types of pedophiles. Some like children. Some get married just to produce children that they can molest. But there's a whole world of men who like prepubescent and just budding children. Some like little boys. Some are sharing the kids because there's a lot of money that way with images or in person. So there are many different layers, many different reasons, but they're making money off of all of it. They're selecting out of the community. When I understand people who are against abortion, and if I look at feminists, I say, oh, all you gave me was an abortion. Well, Margaret Feynman says that's actually not good for society if people don't stop having children. But this is why they gave us abortion, because they know that if we are in a bad predicament and have children, there's a whole entire system that is set up to take our children. And I've spoke to many other men who I can tell they're upset. They're upset by what's been done to them. They're so hurt. You know, you can tell the difference between someone who's legitimately been hurt.
But I think women are too. Women are upset about what's been done to them, you know,
Yes.
as well as men are
Yes.
upset. You know,
Yes.
I spent a lot of time trying to teach children at school. You know, I would not have given that effort to actually get them to read if I didn't care about my own children, you know, and these silly, stupid social workers are foul. They're worse than the worst people I've ever met in my entire life. Most of them are prison wardens in the UK, and they come from families that are used to dealing with prisoners. So you can imagine how they deal with the public. They treat them the same. They treat them in the same abusive manner.
They do. They feel that they're better than you, and there's a social engineering. They feel they know what's right for you all, and psychologists. We went to an AFCC conference. I guess it was about 2015, and we just walked around the outside. We didn't pay, but they're all the same type of person. They have little goatees and pince nez, and they think they're so above the rest of us, you know. So, and then we were wearing these t-shirts and looked kind of dumpy, and we joked, oh, they probably think that we're domestic violence people because we don't fit in, you know. And a lot of the social workers, they don't even clean up themselves, you know. They don't present themselves in a dignified manner. They're sloppy. I mean, Melanie Gill, seriously, who would take that woman the way she presents herself? Who would take her? And not everybody who's sloppy looking is a terrible person. I don't mean to say that, but you know, this is who they're forcing us to deal with. The guy who they appointed in my case, Dr. Ring, he was a big player, and we're going to have a conference because the evaluation has come out and called me crazy, and we're having a conference, and he comes in and the lawyers are in the corner, and I had hired a second lawyer who was supposed to be important. And Dr. Ring comes in, and one of the lawyers said, "Oh, how are you doing? Oh, you just got back from Tuscany." Now I'm in this podunk little town in the U.S., and he's going to Tuscany on vacation, you know. "Oh, you're tan. You look so good." "Oh, yeah. They're all hobnobbing in the corner. And, you know, I'm somebody who I was trying to get like a secretarial $9 an hour job just to get my life together. And these big, you know, but that's how they are. They're important people. Believe me, they travel the world. And you'll find that with the domestic violence people too. They're at international conferences. They are the, you know, they get $500 hairdos. Yes.
Sorry, just about in. As I've said before, I believe that these people may be narcissistic, and if you understand the narcissistic behaviour, then that might actually,
you know,
explain a lot of it.
I'm so turned off to the psychological industry that I just use human terms, and I'm very inner city, and you're getting to meet me now because I've been broken down, but I just call them full of themselves. They really love themselves, don't they? You know, I don't even care about the damn terms. And there's a practice, they call it diagnose and treat. So the minute they put a diagnosis on you, then they can treat you. Well, you know, I mean, we've all got flaws. So, yeah, I mean, I actually, if you want to give it, I call them psychopaths because they're all a bunch of psychopaths, you know. There's cluster B. That's a good one. There's a lot of people who do a lot of work, but you will get fooled. There's a guy, Bill Eddy. He's one of they use them inappropriately. It's like alienation. How come Natalie's not alienated? How come I'm not alienated? It's used selectively. So we can't trust something that is used inappropriately or selectively. And I believed I had freedoms and get out of my life. You don't know any better than I do. If I want to go to a counselor, and I was seeing a counselor and I liked her, it is my free will. If I feel the counselor is not helping me, I should have the right to leave. If you're setting up some kind of scam because you want me to take counseling with this man who I've just filed divorce from, whatever the reasons are, and I have lots of reasons, and I don't need to reiterate. I don't need to go on a long reiteration of what happened to me. This is something that I can do in the counseling office or amongst my friends. I don't need a system, whether it's domestic violence that wants to put me in one of their counseling things, and they have them. And then they want me over and over again to go over what happened to me. That's not going to heal me. It's not going to help me put it in my place. And I need a job. I need a house. I need a place to live. I need to cook dinner every night. I want kids to enjoy, you know, so those little psychological things, they're meant to keep me down. I'm sorry to say that. This is why people hate me. Beware, because they act like, oh, I feel so sorry for you. Poor you. You've been through so much. May be true, but that doesn't help me in the long run. It keeps me in a place
They don't
where
do that to me. They don't take that line with me. I can assure you I'd never get any sympathy out of anyone. Getting an apology out of them is impossible. Even that's when they've done something wrong, you know. And you can. I'm currently got a 2-tier situation going on with NSPCC, and I'm not quite sure whether they're involved or not as well. And I think they probably are. And if they're getting information from this local authority, why are they acting when the local authority can't be bothered to even write back? You know, and we're at an impasse because I've told them if they don't start replying and doing something, there's going to be a drama about it all. And I will, even if I have to fund it myself, I'll make it happen.
My advice is to be very, if you're in, this is the legal system. The legal system was set up to be rational and to work in a certain way. You need to document. You need to be very strategic. When they get you to a social services, they're working your emotions. That's a whole different thing. So if you can stay clear-eyed, it's very, very hard because the things that are happening to you are horrific. And the things that you've witnessed or that are happening to your child are even more horrific. And you should have a good lawyer who helps you navigate that. But unfortunately, you might not be able to trust your lawyer. So on some level, you need to figure out what they're doing. And this is how I could come to the point where my knowledge level is to say, no, this is what's happening. This is what they're doing. This is what the minute I allow them to play me for being a victim, I will be a victim. That's my ex-husband. He was a victim. He could never take control of his actions. He didn't what they call own his behavior. I understand that what happened in my family, or, you know, if you file for divorce, you've taken the first step to take charge of yourself and your life, and you should be given that. And the minute they want to treat you, or the one program they've put in the UK is called Safe and Together, and they're claiming they can fix the domestic violence by fixing the perpetrator, by using the child. So now you're in a system, believe me, they're going to make you a victim, and you're going to be treated like a victim, and you are never going to be empowered to take control of your life. And the minute that they say, you have to share this child with the person who has done very bad things to you and your child, and maybe you don't feel they're the best person, you're a victim. But they're not working to help you recover, get a house, get on with your life. They are working to keep you in that underclass. And so they're going to play games with your head. No, we're treating him. We're treating the child. And yet that's not what's really going on. You're being played for a victim. So we see that any small thing that they can find, that's their in, and that's what they will use. And what we've discovered is that, so this is how they act when there's a small thing. So when there's a big thing, it's even worse. And so it like they found in the UK, support not separation. Their children really do need some serious help, and they need some programming, some very high quality programming, because even the people who work sometimes in the fields of autism or severe disabilities, maybe you want help for your child, and that's not what you're getting, because 30 years of this entrenchment in academia has created a class of social workers and that are so mediocre and so low caliber, and yet that's what you're stuck with, and you're begging for help.
It's worse than that. They don't even know what my daughter even looks like. She's 17. I showed them a picture of her, and they couldn't identify her. So how are they telling me that my daughter is well, not harmed, emotionally happy, everything else that they tell me, when it's all bullshit because of the fact they don't even know what she looks like?
And they don't care, really. It's all just to, I guess it's a condescension, but it's also a blowing you off, and they're not going to, it lets you know right away they're not going to address the issues, the real issues. Yeah, but they're targeting them and putting them in these residential homes. And what I have read is that they're bringing in low-wage workers for these children through India by giving them these temporary visas and promising them that they can bring their whole family over if they only work these low-wage jobs for so long, and pay to be educated in this low-wage job and and then they tell them these jobs aren't available. So there are just so many multiple systems, and they've all been corporatized. The third sector, the nonprofits. So we are on the way to identifying what systems and what the money, how it really operates. So what do you want to learn from me? I know too much, and I've gone off on a more emotional than I wanted to be, but is there I'm going to look at my notes, and I'm going to see if people have something more specific they want to address.
Maria, who would like to ask you something, Doreen.
Okay.
Thank you so much for this talk. It's amazing. It's like triple PhD in AFCC. Saved so much time. I cannot imagine how much research you have done. Can you hear me okay? Because
Yes.
last time, yeah, okay, thank you. So my question is, have you come across any attempts to meaningfully quantify the negative impact of this system? So the footprint on real people's lives, health, like, is there anyone thinking what kind of parameters would need to be assessed? Because in UK, there was recently a very good research published on the health impact, negative impact of family courts, specifically on women's health. So is there anything along these lines related to AFCC? I'm not talking about like research which is trying to put AFCC into the completely negative lane, but rather somebody who tried to make a picture more complete, that AFCC is not as white as it presents itself.
I hate to no, I haven't.
Would you see a way to fund this kind of research? Because my first question about UK was how on earth that they managed to get it officially funded. They got a grant for it. So I'm starting to look into the funding sources for this kind of research.
Okay. So I work in the United States, so it's different funding. So I cannot, this is why I'm here, because maybe this can stem out of the United Kingdom as opposed. In the United States, the fatherhood it's funded under this fatherhood schism, which is child welfare, it's all fatherhood, Department of Education. So the research into child welfare is all framed along the lines of either fatherhood or domestic violence. There is very limited independent research into what children need to thrive and to develop child development. That's the point. It's not real child development people that have developed these programs and that operate these programs. Very hard to find research. So the United States has the top level warehouse for research, academic research, is called PubMed. It runs out of the National Institute of Health. The Psychological Association is allowed to automatically upload their research to that website that's very affiliated with the government, PubMed, PubMed. And you go on there and they have a search engine and you can search keywords. If you want to search child development, you probably would find some research. But you will find heavily co-parenting, fatherhood, and I'm just throwing out some keywords of research. Alienation is prevalent. The gatekeeping. I found over 2,000 articles on alienation, legitimizing alienation, just on PubMed the last time I looked. A lot of co-parenting, that's the best thing. America has created research that co-parenting and fatherhood is what is best for the child. It comes under this fatherhood research. It's been funded by the government, but also private endowments. One of them is the Annie Casey Foundation. There is actually a compendium of all of the fatherhood research that is back from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and maybe 2000s. So there is a book that you could buy. I cite it in one of my books. And it talks about all this research. It goes through the research that proves that fatherhood is good for children. So basically, that's all you need in life. You don't need money. You don't need housing. You don't need clean neighborhoods, lack of drugs. and they left it all out of the research. So they left out any negative influences, and they tainted, it's highly tainted, highly whitewashed research that's been generated over decades. It's a sociologist. So all of the research, a lot of research that comes out of the United States is actually tainted by ideology and funding. And two of my books, I go into how to track that. I might have an article that tracks that. And in the United States, when a judge makes a custody determination, and say he gives custody to the father, or sends somebody to a treatment program, and then they call it step visitation. So maybe you have supervised visits to begin with and you don't have a lot of custody, but then you get more and more step visitation. They give you more and more. That person doesn't, I don't even think they know it, but they are being bumped back to a research program. And I've identified some of them where I've identified the community program and then the researchers. So there's one program in California outside of San Francisco with Berkeley University. That's a well-known liberal, we think it's liberal college. It comes out. Berkeley generates something called queer theory, which is part of the trans ideology. But they print, and they are cited in the guidelines for how to evaluate parents, the psychological, Cohen and Cohen, that is the name of the researchers. And they put out this research called gatekeeping, gatekeeping, where in cases where mothers are abused. So mothers are the gatekeepers, and they have this research. And so they got all these programs. It's called, the program that they run out of Berkeley is called Fatherhood Involvement. And they're getting these guys from the community, and then they are systematically giving them more and more custody. And if the mother tries to say, these are guys who have done drugs, they're on alcohol, they have low wage jobs, maybe they don't have jobs. Some people are very promiscuous, maybe they live on the street, but these are the people that they're using to generate this research. There's a program from Yale, and they're using drug abusers, and they want to import this program because it works. They want to import it to the UK. So I think that I personally have not identified the real research. My UK friend who taught me this book taught me this guy, Bilby. He wrote research about maternal attachment. And literally we found an article written in this book that talks about changing the attachment and how fatherhood should be the attachment, and that the mother's attachment doesn't matter. So this is all very strange what's coming out of that. But I even went to court. When I went to court, I subpoenaed the school, the teachers. I was involved in the school, and they got all mad at me because how dare I? And I'm like, if anybody should be witnessing about what's best for my kid, it should be this guy. He's got a doctorate of childhood education. He knows more about children than Dr. Ring, the Tuscany vacationing evaluator. But yeah, so I think that that's a real gap in the work that I've done, is that to put together some legitimate research, but it's not being funded. Women, and this is where I got when I was researching my AFCC net book, and I do a chapter on research, and I tell you how fatherhood research is published on PubMed. Domestic violence research, the stuff that you're seeing through their domestic violence propaganda machine, that's not published on the government website. That is published in a trade association, often civic research, and that's something that they generate. Or there's a domestic violence site called VAW, which is Violence Against Women. I think it's net. And they publish that. It's one of the groups that was started under the domestic violence. So they publish the domestic violence funding. So they have two separate, not only flows of research and citations they use, but publishing vehicles. So Wiley is a big international out of UK publishing firm. They publish fatherhood stuff, and they promote it to all the professors and the academics. And they get, but the domestic violence stuff is not published by Wiley, and they'll probably start next week. But it is published by domestic violence organizations. Sage Publishing is a big one. So this is very odd. If you were doing legitimate research, you would not have two separate vehicles of publishing.
Yeah, I wanted to say, Doreen, I've got my hand up. It's becoming evident that it's very difficult to have confidence in any research. I've got a friend who's is in London University studying something like chemistry. And he said, you know what, Mum, our research that we're doing is getting funded by Chinese corporations.
Yes.
And it's just sort of illustrative of, I work in a form of research, not academic research, design research, but I can see how easy it is to be paid to find an outcome. And
I believe that's what's happened. It's set up from the get-go, and it's set up with the funding. And so the research is not independent. It is whitewashed, it is ideological. And so there is a legitimacy. I mean, a lot of the domestic violence, the research that they publish, yeah, it sounds good, but it's still not untainted. It is selective, and it's not good for us. It's not good for people who are legitimately victims, who have experienced domestic violence. And if you put out research that's not like, what you would do is you would take one family court, even if you take one family court, and you would take every single case that flows through there, and then you would look at every single case. And that's not what you're doing. You're taking people that you met online who say that they are domestic violence victims, and then you take their case and you frame it and you wrap it up, and maybe you have 300 of them. And this is how they got the fatherhood stuff started. This is how the father's rights work. They took certain research and they packaged it up, and they said, see, this proves that men can do better. And they took all high-level income people, and this proves it.
Doreen, could I just share one thing I think is quite helpful for the families to know, and that is the amount of propaganda that there is going around. And there is somebody mentioned Freud. His nephew is a guy called Edward Bernays, and I realized that there is in Croatia, where my child custody case happened, there's something called the Edward Bernays Institute, where they teach marketing, and where one of the key child protection people works, who's responsible for the scandals about, false allegations of parental alienation. Edward Bernays worked with the CIA. He was you probably know this, Doreen,
No.
of propaganda, who worked out the way to get messages out to the public on a massive scale was to get experts like dentists, for example, to extol the virtues of a particular toothpaste. And what we're seeing with this psychology particularly the family court stuff, is massive propaganda. And I know mothers in Asia who are saying that Asian countries are getting battered by the fatherhood movements to take up the AFCC models. And
Oh, really?
the Asian countries are not very keen to do it because they have their own cultures, which are still centered around the mother-child relationship. But
Yes.
they're using economic diplomacy to push it a little.
Okay. Yes, that is another way that it's all connected.
Yeah.
And they're teaching that in their business schools. And
Yeah.
I mean, I wanted to ask about the propaganda. Do you have the same propaganda in America that we have here?
oh, we have huge.
We have silly amounts of paedophilia and other stuff. It's unbelievable the amount of stuff that comes out. I just wondered if you had the same thing in America.
The corporate players operate the media in America now. Where I live, every newspaper is owned by an equity firm, and you can go 60 miles out and a whole circle. So there are 9, and it's even layered. They're little local paper, and then there's a higher one. They're all owned by the same company. And yes, America the news is tainted. It is meant to give an emotional reaction. And so even the stories that sound good are often pushing a hidden agenda, which is related to money. And the left, I call them the left wing. Which domestic violence that has infiltrated the United Kingdom. They're left leaning. So the left has their own media sources, and apparently a lot of the newspaper reporting that comes out of the United States, the New York Times and the Washington Post, they're aligned with the left. So they would be aligned with the domestic violence narrative. But if you notice, the stuff that talks about family court in a domestic violence framework is all framed as the court doesn't recognize domestic violence, because in the United States, domestic violence is not funded to take care of children. It is not abuse against children. That's a whole separate funding. It's child welfare. It's all separate. And so domestic violence must frame their trainings and their research. It's all framed around against the mother. That's why you see this post-separation domestic violence, or we call it violence in the US, post-separation domestic abuse. They need coercive control. They need to frame it along those lines because that validates the funding. And nobody's told that. There is a legal group in the United States that published a piece where they felt custody should be awarded based on what was done prior to divorce. It's called the approximation rule. And they came up, it's very intelligent. They've done a lot on child welfare also. You never hear about that. It's buried. And if you talk to domestic violence, they don't talk about the approximation rule. That would get you out of court. It would get you out. The decision should be made within a couple months. You know, you should be allowed on your own to solve your own problems. But anyway, it's all propaganda. It's all behavioral sciences. It's in the business. They're all interacting with each other through these groups. AFCC is the major one. And that's what I mean. Some AFCC people will actually be coming out of the business departments in these law schools. Or, I mean, some of the psychiatrists are in on this, but I haven't noticed a proliferation of psychiatrists involved. I've noticed a lot of psychologists, a lot of sociologists.
In Europe, there are psychiatrists who have gone to the dark side.
See, they'll cross over here eventually.
Yeah.
I don't worry about who generated it first. It's all, it's morph. There's so many of them. They can morph at the speed of light a lot faster than I can track them. So this one book that I referenced, Mediation Techniques, they're in the process of rewriting it and republishing it. I can't keep up with their, if I filed an ethical complaint on my evaluator, and believe me, I filed a legitimate charge. He was charged. All they did was pass a law that nobody else can file an ethical complaint. They're very quick. So I feel that identifying how they operate and talking about how they operate, they are infiltrated the universities. This is what's being taught. I did a microcosm on one little area in the United States because I had a friend and I helped her out. The university, the Washington University, which is in St. Louis, Missouri, we found 5 schools within one university that were working with family court. The Department of Law, the law school, they had people who were getting positions as evaluators and mediators and even judges. They were marketing the mediation things. So we found numerous ones then. The School of Social Work was a complete fatherhood school, and they were working with Obama to set up policy. And I found a commencement speech where he's bragging, and then they were having, on the weekends, they would have continuing education classes. And one of the community directors of the community program was teaching people how to set up community programs. And then the Department of Psychology was doing evaluations. So you would go there for your evaluation. And they had identified 13 people who he wrote these bogus, and some men he wrote these bogus reports on. And the Department of Psychiatry had a contract with children and youth, $50 million per year to evaluate and treat just one little community. And there was another one that they were I think it was psychiatry or maybe it was social work, but they literally were working within the community with pregnant teens or teens who had foster program teens. And so they were basically using these programs to find new victims. And there was a tax, and they were using the money. And then they had other programs that was called parent education. That's another AFCC. And they were teaching people how to co-parent. You would have to pay for this class. And they were running that out of a school that was supposed to be set up to teach people how to farm and better techniques for this type of, they called them land grant colleges. They were supposed to teach people skills, and they're teaching them co-parenting skills, how to domestic violence co-parent when domestic violence.
Doreen, I just like to let everybody, first of all,
you want to shoot yourself now, right?
Jack, who's running the next session, has arrived, and he's actually got his hand up. He might want to ask you something, Doreen.
Oh, yes, I recognize you, Jack.
But could I just say something?
Am I hitting some points there, Jack?
Just one teeny little point I just wanted to say. You mentioned the land colleges. My local domestic abuse service, I was accused of parental alienation. It's funny. And then I looked into their funding, and one of the funders is some sort of Californian land court thing. I might be misremembering who it was that was getting a UK organisation who's dealing with domestic abuse, who is funded by a Californian land college. I was like,
why don't you send me that? That's a connection. I found Janet Johnson, who's she reformulated parental alienation. I found her in some odd places, and we had an auditor that told us 5 different ways that they are doing payoffs. That's a whole nother level of, and one of the ways they are doing payoffs is from awards. So you get an award, and there's an economic award that runs out of my government, and I found her involved in that. So there's some, I am talking top level. The stuff that I'm talking is very legitimate, very research oriented. You can't argue with it. The lower level, the payoffs that are occurring, that's a whole nother realm that is definitely occurring. Some of the lawyers are acting like middlemen. That's a whole nother, I'm not, and Jack is more, I find that men are very geared towards that kind of work. They're wonderful at it.
welcome, Jack. It's lovely to have you. Yeah.
Yeah. Can y'all hear me okay? Like sometimes the volume is not so good for me. I don't have
Are you happy for this
proper-
session to be recorded? Is that okay with you?
Yeah, that's great, Nat.
Cool. Okay.
No, yeah, like everything y'all are talking about is spot on, you know. My perspective might be a little different, just, you know, in the fact that my child support and custody case, you know, my daughter's mother, their family, they're all attorneys. So I know the underhanded evil things they do in family courts, you know. They and I realized, you know, here probably within the past year or two of, you know, doing the research that, you know, we're all involved in, is like, so a lot of this began in the 70s, right? But this was spurred on early on by, like, you know, institutes like Tavistock. Tavistock is so prominent in everything that we're studying. And a friend of mine, Dana, like, she's a fellow, you know, she's a researcher also, but we exchange information. But she sent me some documentation, you know, some work from, I can't remember who it is now. I know I have the PDF and everything, but a lot of these psychiatrists and psychologists, including you know, bar attorneys, a lot of those thoughts have been derived from, you know, the Tavistock teachings, with the intent to inject them into, you know, the public. You know, that's where the indoctrination comes in. You know, it's like,
Yes.
you know, we talk about CPS, you know, Child Protective Services, and then we have all these mechanisms, you know, that are designed to attack each individual part of the family, you know, from the mother to the father to the children, you know. I would say that child support is to men what CPS is to women, you know. We're seeing, and it's only been exacerbated over the years by these NGOs like Maximus, and then you have these big accounting firms like Deloitte, and, you know, tech companies like Palantir, and some of these other companies that have their base in the military industrial complex, you know, and
Yes.
the same thoughts, those same policies, you know, developed by like Tavistock, and even before that, you know, and I know it's a sore point for a lot of people, is like, you know, what Hitler was doing in Germany, Manhattan Project, Paperclip, Artichoke and those operations, they started out as not just military operations, but social engineering. And you got to remember that in the States, and I know they're prominent elsewhere, people like Serco, and then we have like DARPA. Those companies now they're invested in high technology, but equally so they're invested in social engineering to the highest degree.
Yes.
Even now it's like, and I stray away from it, like, on my Twitter accounts and some of the other social media I have, but child support's still a sore subject for a lot of people, and I understand why, because I've been through the system, I've been there. But you have to get away from your trauma. You have to get out and away from that to be objective about what you're researching and how it came to be, and
But we say it's a gateway. It's another way of finding victims, assessing cases. And I didn't get into that. It's a whole game they play. It's a numbers game, and there's rewards for having the numbers add up, and it's selective who pays what, and it's a punishment system. So anyway, we could get all into that, but
it definitely is,
it was a good vehicle for putting this program into place, and there was a lot of pretense of the fatherhood program had a lot of pretense, and what it is doing is not what it says it's doing, right?
No, it's not, and it was never.
And maybe it was, but it's been almost 30 years, and it's you're selecting cases. You need to select from both sides.
Yeah, you really do.
It's too obvious if you select just one.
Yeah, and there again, those if at least in the States, if you go through a child support manual or anything for judges and attorneys involved in like child support, family court cases, if you read through those manuals, they read like a military instruction manual, like a SOP, a standard operating procedure.
Yes.
Very much of it is the same language. Now it gets conflagrated when you add in the legalese that's used by the bar association, right? They're using terminology that none of us would even associate. So they changed the meaning of words for a myriad of reasons, either one to change a narrative or just straight up confuse people. They don't want you to know what they know, or and like you stated earlier, Doreen, and it happened to me personally, is like as soon as you know what they're doing and then you go after them, they change their tactics. Lobbyists, go to these NGOs.
They stop answering.
Yeah, and they change the laws. They literally rewrite laws because they know people are onto what they're doing. And that happened to me in some of my filings. I was like, okay, I know what you're doing, so I'm going to go after you now. As soon as I started filing in quote unquote child support court and then in federal district court, everything I filed was dismissed, with prejudice. They didn't like me naming names. They didn't like the fact that I knew what they were doing.
So you are in the United States, right?
Yeah, I'm in Tennessee.
Okay.
Southeast Tennessee.
Nice state. I do know a few of the old players from Tennessee and the politicians, Fred Thompson and some others. I've got some connections to pedophilia. Very, very, very bad people. Be careful. James Baker. So anyway,
Baker, Steve Cohen, out of Memphis, and then my daughter's mother's family, because of their affluence, the Frist family. I don't know if any of you know who the Frist family is, and if you don't, you really need to research them. Bill Frist is who was the author of Obamacare, the Affordable
Yes.
Health Care Act. Okay. So
which got a lot of psychos funded because now their counseling can be paid for. And
yeah, exactly. And then just here recently, I figured out like those connections between like Maximus and I knew Maximus created the databases for Obamacare through the Minnesota Federal Health Exchange, right?
the second time, because the first time they were really a mess, and then somebody came in and straightened them out. Is that? I'll drop that. Drop it. It doesn't matter.
No, it's important to understand, these databases that exist, and like all the research I've done thus far points that the at least in the U.S., at least in the states, these the foster care databases, the Title IV-D funding, the Title IV-E for foster, foster care databases. There again, sorry. Then you go to teen pregnancies and runaways. All those databases were created by Maximus originally. They took up the helm after what was his name, Ross Perot, in the 60s. He made his billions through managing the Medicare and Medicaid programs, right? So, but Maximus is just such a major player in the United States and globally now, and it just can't be underscored enough. Like the destruction these military industrial complex, quote unquote, healthcare companies have wrought on people. They're making their money off of us and our children, and have done so for what Maximus was founded literally the year Title IV-D was signed into law. So that's 48 years there, right? So then we go back to like Mitre Corporation. Let's see who else was involved. The Rand Corporation. I think they were founded in 46 or 47 with Rand. So they predate Maximus, but it's the same people,
Have you put this in a diagram or some kind of form?
I'm working on some mind maps, I guess you would say, showing these connections. But my God, it's an undertaking.
I can imagine. I tend to need stuff in a very simplistic ABC type manner. I talk to people, and generally I stick with the real structural stuff, but yeah, there are a lot of political ties. And what I saw is once the welfare reform was passed, there were offshoots. Some people started consulting groups. Some people started this company and that company, and they've all like offshoot on the basic funding and help set up a structure that is not what it's saying it is. So
yeah, I mean, it all comes down to money laundering, right? That we know what they're doing.
in many ways, yes.
But yeah,
ideology laundering.
The thing about Maximus is like, I discovered them, I wouldn't say it was a happenstance. I think I was meant to find it in the way I did now, looking back, Maximus had the first welfare to work contract.
Oh, the contract to run that.
And they also had the first Title IV-D contract in the country. Now this was, a little bit later after all that had passed, but previous to that,
That's child support,
Yeah.
right?
Title 4D, 1975.
Do you believe that they are doing some nefarious things with their computer systems? Thank you. That's a way. Do they? Because when we looked into it, we thought they were running double dockets, like a shadow docket that
Yeah, and you
tagged
also got
the
to.
case. They had little codes on there that were saying this case is for a research project or something else. So you think they're capable of all that, right?
The same people that were involved in MK Ultra are the same people involved where we're at now with family court. Family court isn't, you have the military psyops, and those divisions in the
Yes.
military, the intel agencies, right? Aside from the military ops, but the same people, and I can prove it unequivocally, like that were involved with MK Ultra, were the people passing, legislation, funding. The Title 4D stuff was written by a man named. It was him. There was a small group of them, but it was primarily authored by Russell B. Long. He was a senator from Louisiana. His father was Huey Long.
Are you familiar
Roosevelt
with all the files that are on Google Docs in America? Because I was passed a link which had just about nearly 15 million billion Google Docs on it, all to do with court cases in America. Have you seen that at all?
I personally have not, but I'd love to.
I'll see if I can find it. It was in one of my email accounts. But you could open up this link, and it gave all the documents for the current family court, even the court cases with Jeff Epstein, and all of that was in it as well. Everything was on the whole searchable system on Google.
Oh, that's wonderful, Martin. That's wonderful.
Yeah, I mean,
read everything you can, because what you'll see is like these court cases, the attorneys and magistrates, even the sheriff's offices in the United States, they're all contracted through Title 4D, in that aspect. But when you start doing the really deep dives, you'll start seeing, across. You'll see the same name in multiple places, right? So then you can start painting a picture. My thought is like the big picture is made up of the details. You have to be careful not to get mired down on those details, but the details are essential to understanding like how the big picture functions, right? So the guy from the senator who was one of the sponsors for 4D, and I discovered this last year and then lost the link I had to it, and then just recently refound it. But he was mentioned by Claudia Mullen. Claudia Mullen was one of the women who gave MK Ultra testimony to Congress during the Church Committee hearings in the United States. Claudia Mullen specifically named Russell Long as one of the people she was being, there's no polite way to say it. She was used as a tool against a lot of senators, a lot of congressmen.
A honeypot?
Yeah, exactly, Doreen. Yeah. Thank you. I didn't want
to. Honey trap.
Yeah. I didn't want to use the words that I.
Oh, I don't get offended. I grew up in Philadelphia. Curse away. We're tough. I've spoken to people who start getting in. They know. The funny thing is, a lot of these big, high-powered men, they all have women. And the women know what the men are, they were married to them. And when they get divorced, all of a sudden, oh, well, he did this, he did that. Well, it was okay when you were living off him,
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
So they can tell you some stories that make your head want to explode. And I see that you have obviously fall into that. It's some very scary stuff. They have, you know, security firms, and if you have the wherewithal to figure all that out, I commend you. So anyway, I can hook you up with somebody who knows some people if you are interested.
That'd be wonderful. You know, it's like, that's one of the things that I stress, you know, in just my daily life, you know, aside from what we're all doing, right, is like connect with like-minded people and support each other. Because if you don't, like, whatever knowledge that you have is kind of all for naught if you're not sharing and passing it on. You know, I really believe in supporting each other.
I find that picking, it's like a nut, and then I pick and I pick and I pick and I learn more and more. And anyway, that so maybe that'll Texas is, certain states seem to be more aligned with the political. Texas and Tennessee and Minnesota seems to be a big, well, Connecticut, but they have their whole thing.
Yeah, you know, I am, of course, slightly biased, but Tennessee has escaped the radar for so long about the, you know, the corruption here. Like, I mean, it is so corrupt. You know,
Yes.
I'm near Chattanooga, just north of Chattanooga, about 20 miles, 22 miles, something like that. Anyway, Chattanooga is a WEF, you know, World Economic Forum listed smart city. These plans were implemented in the 60s and 70s here. And then it occurred to me, I'm like, okay, and I found what I was looking for is like Chattanooga is also a beta testing site, if you want to label it as such, for child support and family court policies. Not just here, but the entire country. You know, they use us here to see what works and what doesn't. You know, and I was like, well, why is that? And then you go back to the politicians, and then, you know, it's you have a eureka moment. You're like, oh, this is why. Most of what we're studying, you know, is like falling under the umbrella of healthcare. You know, you can put just about everything under healthcare. So that's what they're doing. You know, mental health care for children, mental health care for adults, conflict resolution. You know,
Yes.
all these things that they use against us. You know. So
the family court has been structured as on a health model, a public health model. So it is not really being run by evidence, rule of law, and the legal system, as opposed to these treatment management processes. And that's a simplistic way of
a lot of what they're doing is they're using, you know, they've gotten away from the Constitution. Like, you don't have the right to a jury trial in a family court hearing, or child support, or custody.
And you don't even have the right to evidence.
No, you really don't. You know, I know that, you know, through studying some of the commercial law stuff that I've been looking at for a few years now, it's like they're using the UCC, you know, the Uniform Commercial Code.
Yes.
That's what they're basing this off of. It's all commerce to them, you know?
Yes, it is.
So then I got to looking at that stuff, and through some friends and some other areas, it's like, okay, where did that come from? All that stuff goes back to the Canaanites, freaking Canaanites, you know? So it's the Canaanites who were also called the Phoenicians, you know? Well, just a simple letter change, and then you study like the migration of these people. Like the Canaanites, the Phoenicians became the Venetians, the Venetian black nobility. They are the ones who set up the Vatican and the Jesuit order. But that's where our modern banking and usury and everything else came from. So it only makes sense for these quote unquote courts to be using us as chattel, as commercial goods. It's maritime admiralty jurisdiction, and you'll read, if you read the language and study that a little bit, you'll see birth and birth, like BI versus BE, RTH, ships, vessels. It's it gets deep really quick, but
So you've gotten into finding the corporate, you look at the corporate schism and how that connects to what the court is running. That's definitely an area that is needs to be pursued and explained in a manner that's palatable and understandable. And
yeah, it's the conversations that we have, even the research I post on like Twitter and the other platforms I use, like I'm only like skimming the tip of the iceberg, so to speak, because it goes so much deeper than even what I thought, like initially I was like, oh, Maximus is just about child support. I'm like, now I look back on that thought and I'm like, my God, like, where did that come from? Like, why would they be isolated, And
there are days where I figure something out and then I need to walk away for like days.
Yeah. Yeah, you really do. You get like even me, even me. Like I've been studying Maximus for about a decade, maybe a little more now. And even now, like, well, even before then, I've been researching a lot of this stuff. I worked for Big Pharma for a few years. I worked for DuPont for a few years. So I've been through. I wouldn't say I'm unique, but what I've been able to do is like see a nexus between all this information I have. I'm been trying to I'm trying to slowly show not only myself, because I'm still, I'm always learning, and I think that's essential. But what I'm learning, I'm trying to share with people and get input and other people to take a look at what I'm putting out there. I obviously don't know everything, and everybody I know, everybody I've ever met or will meet knows something I don't. So I know what I know, and I know it well. That being said, I'm not so egotistical or full of myself that I'm incapable of learning from other people. That line of thinking will get you nowhere.
No, I'm not. I don't like demeaning. I saw you got demeaned. I don't get. I will get nasty with people who do that kind of thing at some point. But anyway. What is your skill set? What did you do for? Are you a chemist or?
I was for about a decade, I was a batch process chemical operator.
Okay.
So it did involve some chemistry, but it was more me running the equipment, these
Okay.
massive tanks, or what we refer to as reactors. I oversaw chemical reactions.
Oh, because it's dangerous.
Yeah.
To put it mildly.
Yeah.
Put everything mildly.
I worked with some of the worst chemicals. I worked with isocyanates, different types of polymers. I've seen the raw form of most of what people use daily.
Mm.
I've seen it from the raw form, from the raw chemical to the finished product, you know, and that goes for like the pharmaceutical side too. You know, I've made I work for a company called Chatham Chemicals. They're owned by a company from India called Sun Pharmaceuticals. So I've made oxycodone, fentanyl. You know, I've seen the worst of the worst and
Really?
used these chemicals. You know, and had uh, complete moral dilemmas, you know, working for those companies. You know, you see the underside of these things, and you're like, I can either be a part of it, or I can get out of it and share what I know about these things. You know, same way as the family court stuff. You know, I just don't talk about DuPont too much. I have a lot of health issues from the work I did in the chemical industry.
Well, I'm sorry about that. Nerve damage and things.
Yeah, we used, you know, at the time we were using like pure benzene in polymers. We were using BPA before BPA was purportedly banned, you know. But then, you know, I really started looking at things. I'm like, okay, the DuPont family, they've been involved in child trafficking and in some of the worst atrocities committed against humanity that the world has ever seen. Yeah, you know, so so it takes a great deal of studying, or it has for me. You know, some people learn quicker, you know, which is great. But I've really tried to take the time to absorb what I've been researching and putting out, like you said earlier, Doreen, in, you know, in a palatable manner. Because a lot of this stuff still goes over a lot of people's heads, not because they're.
It goes over their heads. Yes, it's very,
you know,
well. It's massive.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
if we look at it in a democratic forum, what we basically can say is the people who are in charge of the systems are not serving the rest of us. And there is no representative government, that's for sure.
Yeah, they're completely self-serving. You know, they really are. They're evil people. They're evil. Like most of us look at a child and, you know, want to do everything we can for them, you know, from our own children to other people's children. But these people look at children as either a commodity or something much worse. You know, we know the evil that they commit against children. But they've been doing that, you know, since the beginning of time. I think just things like they had all these things in place, right? But they were waiting for the technology to catch up, which is what we started seeing in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. You know, with the atomic age, computers. But the 70s is when things just went really haywire. You know.
I feel there are moments in time, though, when people confront entrenched systems and something good can come out of that. So I feel that connecting with each other and maybe listening and trying to understand each other. Like you said, none of us has all the knowledge, but we all have aspects. And if we can't find a way to communicate kindly with each other, it's not going to work. But
yeah,
our governments need to be challenged. The law, the universities, they've all been business. They're highly corrupted.
Yeah, terribly so, Doreen. Terribly so, you know. I know Maximus is working with over 200 higher education and learning institutes. So,
and Maximus has no oversight whatsoever, no accountability whatsoever. They don't get audited. This is another thing we found, is that even if you audit a program, a company, you're auditing the financials. You're not auditing what's actually being done. So if I compare what Maximus does in the digital form, in the computer form, It's almost the same as comparing a social services program, like a treatment program. So they're comparable. So they're not actually getting audited. So you might say, oh yeah, we gave this grant to Maximus and they're spending that money just like they're supposed to. And that's what they do with the treatment center. But meanwhile, if we even look at what they're actually doing, that's a whole different thing that doesn't get audited, or doesn't get looked at.
I'm trying to I have hope, that some of the things that we're learning helps. It's like Maximus has basically been running the IRS for the past 30 years. So we have that aspect, right? And I heard it years ago, and it makes more and more sense to me now when I think about it. It's like, how do you win a horse race? You own all the horses.
And they are able to manipulate all of that.
Yeah.
Like they can I believe that they're manipulating Wall Street and your money that's invested in, I've got a money market. And if you've got a loss, do you put it on me or do you put it on Bill Gates? Well, how easy would that be?
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing.
There's another thing about child support that I found interesting is that it's not in the economic statistics. So if the government is coming out with these statistics on average income, and there's so many people with children in this income bracket, it's support outflows and inflows are not in that. So if there's these different levels, if I'm talking child support, there's low level income people who make, say, $30,000 and less a year. And that's actually a large part of the population. And so they might go into support and get a minimal order for custody, or for you got to pay this much support. But a very high level, a guy who makes $500,000, even 200, a doctor I know, he only has to pay 10%. So he's actually got a lower ratio. And then there's this middle level of men who make, and especially men who are in those fields where they're doing this manual labor or this union type, this is a hard job and you should be keeping your money. You're the one who's getting the $500,000 orders for one child per month, And so that's where we were finding these numbers games. So the doctor who's making $200,000 a year, he doesn't pay, he pays $100. And where the guy who makes $80,000 a year working overtime pays $1,000, what a doctor should be paying. And so we were finding there's all this game playing, but I also found that it's not in the statistics. It's not in the economic data. The government puts out these reports on child support and they write averages for every month of what the child support is. And the average is 250 to 300. Well, that's like a bogus figure altogether, right? Because you've got guys paying $1,000. I know women who were ordered to pay $1,000 a month in child support. And so it's not even relative to the money you make. It's not. So you telling me you've got this high-end computer firm that is running this, and yet nobody is actually tying that to IRS numbers. Is it commensurate with the money I actually bring in and have? And it isn't. Do you know what I'm saying on that?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying.
Okay.
I was I had to fight for a reduction in my child support payments at one time. It went from $500 a month to $1,104 and some change. I only have my daughter. That's it.
They played games with it every time I went in there. And so I got on Social Security. I could tell you how to beat. I mean, not everybody can beat it, but it's a game playing. You have to beat it. I get on Social Security insurance. I'm half blind.
Well, you know, that's
just
the
a
account.
game.
Yeah, that's the account they're attacking. Actually, is they're going after your Social Security. That's why it was written into the Social Security Act. You see,
there are 2 books on the foster care system in America that tie the money. So they're tying the foster kids to the Social Security, and they're actually fostering children and putting Social Security orders in there. We found if you go to some domestic violence programs for shelter, they open up a children and youth case automatic without your knowledge. So anyway,
yeah,
I put it in ski.
there's a gentleman. He's a professor. I think he's in Boston. His name's Daniel Hatcher. He's written some.
That's him. I have the 2 books a friend
Oh,
sent.
okay, great,
So
great.
good.
Yeah.
No, I'm overwhelmed. I want to shoot myself sometimes.
Yeah.
I'm exhausted.
His research is exhaustive. You know, I have so much respect for that man. His work is great.
So, so he is another soldier or another weapon in the arsenal of I believe that, you know, it's models and that we the propaganda, it fools people into thinking it's a legitimate system, and there's, to me, there's nothing.
There's, you know, from the onset,
very little.
Yeah, from the onset, it was fraud. From the very onset, they knew the constitutional violations that child support had written in it. And Ford, you know, Gerald Ford, you know, signed it. Just, he was like, you know, I've been reassured, you know, that these constitutional violations, or I can't remember the exact wording he used. But he was like, I've been assured that, you know, these things will be taken care of. And it's like, okay, buddy, yeah, you went ahead and signed it without anything being done about it. You knew it, and now you've created another system of enslavement. You know, debtors' prisons were outlawed. You know, many years ago.
They're not.
Yeah, they really are not. It's just they never really. These things really never go away. They just change form, right?
If they can run up the arrears and get you into prison, then I found they were putting people in a work program. So then they had cheap labor. 6 months. The area where my case was has a lot of Puerto Rican immigrants, and so some of the guys had 3 cases. So they put one away for a year and a half over support. You know, 6 months for every support, and actually the ACLU came in. And did they help him? No, they said that, oh, he deserves a lawyer.
yeah, and of course the lawyers, the attorneys, they're in on the take. The court-appointed lawyers, in particular.
Yes,
these, like, I have such a bias towards lawyers and attorneys. You know, it's hard for me to say, but I don't think they're all bad. There's a
yes. Well, Daniel Hatcher is a lawyer.
yeah, and there is a, oh gosh, she's an attorney in Georgia, and she fights for fathers' rights, and she's been one of the very few outspoken attorneys about the child support and family court system.
I know her. I might have. A Black woman?
No, she's oh gosh, I can't remember her name. Doreen. I follow her on like Facebook, and she's a frequent public speaker about this stuff. You know, I'll find her and post it for everyone. And you know, Natalie has my information too. You know, so you know.
Okay, no big deal. So, what are your plans with all this information? I'm often stymied by the enormity of the operations.
Yeah. I've got enough information, you know, enough research to put together a RICO lawsuit against Maximus. But let me tell you, for a while now, I have been heavily targeted. You know, I've had phone calls from, you know, silent. You know, you pick up the phone, nobody's on the other end, but you see the number, and it's, you know, I've made a lot of connections between Maximus and the Jesuits, right? Particularly like some stuff in the UK I was helping a friend on. And this happened twice. I got a phone call through Telegram from his phone number. It wasn't him calling me. Somebody had cloned his phone number and called me through Telegram. He traced the IP address back to a Jesuit church not far from him. So because of what I was sharing with him, they're now looking at him and me. And this is in the UK. You know, I've made my share of enemies, and but I don't care. I do not. You know, I've been to jail. Like I went to jail for a bogus child support order. You know, for anybody listening, these aren't courts of law. These are commercial courts, and they generate artificial debts, and then they claim it's a court order that you violated. It's not a freaking court. They have Dun and Bradstreet numbers. So think about that. This is all commerce. You know, the prison industrial complex is involved, the medical industrial complex, the pharmaceutical industrial complex, however you want to, you know, all these different aspects of this stuff exist. I've seen most of it. So yeah, I was in jail for almost 6 months because of a bogus child support order. But they make it, or at the time they had made it so that it was almost impossible to get out of it. And they were doing that because you know, they'd set a child support order, and then if you ended up in arrears, at the time the state of Tennessee was charging 12% interest on your arrears payment.
Oh, dear.
So you know, it was really eye-opening for many reasons when I was in jail. But then you start talking to the people that you're in jail with, and most of them were in there for child support, and it was a particular demographic. Color is irrelevant. They attack the poor. You know, that's their bread and butter, is the disadvantaged and the poor. That's where Maximus has found most of its contracts coming from, is social services, you know. But a lot of companies are doing that. IBM and Lockheed Martin were involved in child support for a long time, and they were some of Maximus's main competitors. But then you start looking at who's on the roster, you know, these employees for these companies, and like this guy worked for Maximus and also Lockheed Martin, you know, this same guy also worked for like Raytheon, and then you know, so they I think they learn what they can, and then they move to a different company and apply what they learned at the previous company to the new company. But you've got high-level intelligence officials in all of these companies. You know, you've got ex-Department of Defense officials. So yeah, it's a
I
massive
could
system.
totally get behind nobody goes to jail for owing support. I could totally get behind a movement if you want to do propaganda. I think that's an absurd thing. You know, and like you said, it's often they set you up. See, one of the other scams that we found they were running was they steal kids that way. So some of the women, I met a woman, she had a child support order for one kid. And okay, so she has 2 more children, and then she owes support for the first one, and they put her in jail and take the 2 kids. So anyway, no one should go, if you're legitimately not able to pay, and these amounts are not based on any rational amounts, they're made up. So I would totally get behind that.
Yeah, you know, like,
I don't see how you can complain about people not being put in, people, a lot of the domestic violence, it's rare for them to go to jail for any kind of time. And I'm talking about women who have had their sexual pictures of them put online and things like that. That's some really I'm talking high level. I'm not talking about, oh, I grabbed her, because they're putting those guys in jail. And this support, you're going to spend 6 months, you're not going to pay support. I don't agree with that. So anyway.
yeah, it's
But people don't even realize the level. There's so much propaganda that, oh, deadbeat dad, and the fact that they're not,
yeah, the deadbeat dad mythos came from, like, places like
And-
Tavistock.
yeah,
They
and
want
the
that.
whole fatherhood program was passed based on we're not seeing our kids because we're supposed to, and you supposedly solved that problem 25 years ago. You've been funding it at the level of billions of dollars a year, and you still are putting people in jail. Well, then obviously what you did is not working.
Oh, it's working great for them.
Exactly. So it was all a
not
scheme
anyone
that
else.
your little corporate entities embedded within every aspect of everything in our lives.
Yeah. It's there
Is
again.
that bottom lining?
Yeah, it's social engineering. They don't want people to realize what they're doing. They get. I called out several of the magistrates. I knew what they were doing. I called them out in court. You want to talk about some pissed off people?
I stood up to them also. So
when you and it's Jesus Lord, it's all in it's contracts, right? And to think about what you were talking, about tracking. Okay, when I realized really, really quickly, studying just the child support aspect. Okay, there is in the original language, it's called a parent locator service.
okay, I've seen it.
Okay, those systems are designed for tracking.
Yes,
that's what they are. That's the systems that they use for tracking were evolved from NSA programs, from Department of Defense programs. Maximus has created multiple tracking programs. Because that's what the founder of Maximus was doing while he was in Vietnam. He was running just literally like these programs. Some of these programs aren't even declassified now. But one of the programs was it's called McNamara's Wall. One of the operations is called Igloo White. So all your sensor technology that you see now is derived from that one program that he was the data analyst for. Targeting and tracking systems, telemetry systems, they've all been applied to family court. And I got to thinking, I was like, okay, if you're a high level pedophile and you need to procure children, where are you going to go? Well, let me reach out to my friend in family court who's got access to these databases, who can generate socioeconomic profiles of families that I can attack. That's all you need.
And you have your friendly social workers go in and
You've got your foot soldier, you got your foot soldiers.
I actually, yeah, I can see it.
Yeah. I started going through, and I use everything for research, and I use everything from like Yandex, to like, I even use Google and Google Books, it doesn't matter because I try to cross-reference everything I research, I don't want to put out misinformation for anyone ever. So if anybody sees that from me, please call me on it. I'll gladly correct it. But I started going through a bunch of health and human services compendiums, and there was just an overwhelming amount of assessments coming from Maximus. So, and so then I started thinking about that. I'm like, these assessments are what led to policy changes, and those policy changes are what eventually yielded to new laws being passed through legislation, and lobbyists. They affect, Maximus has affected and corrupted everything they've touched since the inception of the company. And they've done that through various means. One of them is called the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC for short.
Yes.
Yeah. So it was Maximus who
They were involved in ALEC?
Yeah, they're a member of ALEC.
How about that?
Yeah. So the these same things that we're seeing in the US have become a cancer and has spread to the UK, Natalie. They've spread to Australia. Any of these countries that Maximus has programs in, Canada, they run healthcare assessments for the entirety of the UK. These things, the US is basically a testing ground for them, along with UK and Australia being most predominant. There again, it's just they want everything privatized to remove power from whatever corrupt government there is in whatever country. So it creates
oversight and basically a majority population that you can prey upon.
Exactly.
That is in such a precarious position, they'll do anything you tell them to.
Yeah.
And you can steal their kids at will.
We have a question from the audience. Maria's got her hand up. Would that be okay? Maria, would you like to go ahead and ask?
Hi, Jack, a question to you. Do I hear correct that if they have these advanced systems that allow fast profiling and data gathering and analysis, basically what they're doing is evil data-driven policy making and lawmaking. So is there a way?
Are you able to hear Maria properly, Doreen and Jack?
Sorry, is there a problem with the sound?
Yes, that's much better.
It's concentrating. I'm
now?
trying to concentrate.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Okay, great. It's my headset. Sorry about it. So the question is, if I hear you correctly, what they're doing is the policy making based on data that they're able to gather rather quickly and analyze. Is this correct?
I think it's about making personal data in very sensitive areas available to people who should not be able to access it. That's one thing. And it's also about using, I'm trying to summarize, and Doreen and Jack, tell me if I'm wrong. I think that, Maximus is so huge that there's lots and lots of different aspects, but it's about running
profiling. Yeah, this running the mechanism to profile quickly what would be a feasible target. Do you think that technologically there is a way to get ahead of this and somehow counteract it or prevent it from the system design perspective? Because there is a way to track what they're doing, probably.
We would need some very good white hat tech people.
Yeah.
Hackers and...
Is there one, or it doesn't exist as such?
Sadly, not to my knowledge, but yeah, that's exactly what we would need, would be white hats to circumvent those systems, you know.
It's such a huge corporation that it would take a takeover, right? I mean, you would basically have to either let them all die off or take it over, or, you know.
Yeah, you know, there are bigger companies than Maximus, right? You know, when we talk in terms of just employee numbers, but you would be hard pressed to find a more invasive company than Maximus. And you know, you can go to their websites and you can start looking at these people, and they're so egotistical, you know, they don't hide what they do. So you start looking at their careers, you know, their accolades and things like that. They're highly intelligent, you know, and I don't want to give them too much credit, but everybody involved has been poised and, you know, and placed into the positions they have, you know, for very specific reasons. And a lot of them are from big tech corporations and military industrial complex companies. But yeah, these databases they've created.
I'm just sort of wanting to maybe contextualize this a little bit for the people listening from the UK. So what we're talking about here is quite related to a scandal which broke now since the new year, where it was found that an IT system which was deployed to run transactions in the post office system had faults, and money was disappearing from the accounts of the franchise owners of the neighborhood post offices, and they were accused of theft, and hundreds of them were prosecuted. Some of them were imprisoned, some of them lost their lives because of the distress. Now, the company who built that IT system and maintained it, Fujitsu, has offered to pay £1 billion in compensation over the last week or so, I think. This is a sort of similar instance of one of the enormous multinational corporations which is being contracted by a government which is increasingly reliant on consultancies and outsourcing companies to design and run public services. But this page that I've shared here is a notice of an appointment to the Strategy Advisory Board of Maximus UK. You can see that it is somebody who had senior positions in government, including at the Ministry of Justice. I mean, this is just one instance, but this is stuff which is getting discussed in academia. And there's a very influential book, actually I will go to it. I've tried to share this with Jack, called The Big Con. This is a economist who works at one of our London universities, who is talking about the very negative long-term effects of consulting and outsourcing on governments, what she calls infantilizing governments. But it's a concern when there's this sort of like, I think it's something she mentions as well, there's a revolving door between high level positions in business and government, and it can start to lead conflict of interest type things to creep in. And that's why these kinds of appointments do have to get authorized. But, well, you know, somebody a long time ago told me that they were aware of a very low-level system in the UK, which held very sensitive data, which didn't have any security protections on, and which had somebody maintaining it who was very dodgy, let's say. And this sort of, well, it sort of feels like a manifestation of that kind of thing, but really corporatized and implanted on an industrial scale. We've got a lot of scandals going on about abuse in care homes, which we've been talking about today. And if all of those children are held on databases, and if we've got concerns about institutional and paedophilia, you know, and among high-ranking officials, which it really looks like we've been dealing with.
Oh dear.
You know, and that's just one aspect. I'm sure there are many, many more. Jack, I've never even begun to process the work that you do, because there's so much of it. It's such a huge topic. But I'm so glad that we're having this conversation, and I'm extra glad that Doreen, your conversation segued into Jack's, because you too understand the US landscape, and the interaction has been really interesting, and trying to sort of paint a portrait of how this is impacting the family justice system. But, you know, it's not limited to the US. These things are happening, you know, with Maximus. Yeah. So,
If,
yes.
you can go to, if you go to Google, you can look up the areas that Maximus services, you know, the UK, and it's everything, you know, and they're doing and have done the same thing in the United States, you know.
Yeah. I mean, yes, what we're talking about, data collection. I mean, the scary thing we mentioned before about these family hubs, and the fact that there's been a decision taken, and I think there was a degree of protest about it, that your health records can be shared with social services. And, you know, now there's going to be this kind of multifaceted view of every private individual by the state, but run on corporate systems. Quite recently, when I tried to make a doctor's appointment, it said, oh, it would be much better for you to do it through this application. Here, all you have to do is authorize this private corporation to handle your personal data. And you know, talking quite a lot about AI and things. Oh, it just doesn't feel good. Yeah.
It's terrible. You know, they have these. Nobody should have access to your children's information, but the parent. Period. You know, or maybe except the child's doctor, and it be held in the strictest of confidence and away from systems that can be infiltrated. Right. I mean, they literally, you know, Maximus has literally been tracking people from birth to even before they were born to the time they died since 1975. They've been doing that, you know. It's well shown.
And then we've got all these additional concerns around facial recognition and civil liberties. And
and as a matter of fact, there was a patent. And you can look at it, and I've posted it a few times now, Lee, on my Twitter, but there was a patent from Maximus in the United States, and it was a biometric recording device or something to that effect. I'll send it to you. And but it was patented in the UK. But right after, it was literally 41 or 42 days after 9/11 in the US, right? Maximus had a system set up, patented, where they were capturing biometric data collections in every airport in the United States. And that included retinal scanning, but just nobody was paying attention. So they had the technology well designed even before it was implemented, right? And then they've transferred that technology to whatever country they happen to be operating in. You know, either the various software systems they've developed that is essentially running entire countries' healthcare systems, in particular like UK and Australia. Then more recently, they've become involved in South Korea and Singapore, and then the Middle East. You know, I think Maximus has been serving, you know, a part of the Five Eyes for a long time, also because of the technology they have available to them, or that they've just outright created and patented and marketed, sold. The pervasiveness is just through the roof. And over the years, you know, I found some articles from different people talking about some aspects of Maximus, but nobody's really touching on some of the stuff I'm researching, you know.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, you know,
Yeah, I was just thinking that you need someone to publish a book about all of this, and it's probably not going to happen because of the low level of our journalism in some way. If we can find somebody to, I've lately grabbed onto people who are talking about like a communist structure or a fascist structure that is being instituted by way of the universities in the UN and a globalist. So anyway, I don't know if that's comforting or to you, or if you want to find people that you can connect with that way, or.
Yeah, I've been working with a few people. One woman, she lives in Canada. You know, she's helping me aggregate all the information that I'm putting out. You know, and I've got a few friends that are also helping me with this research. You know, aside from their own research. You know, because, you know.
Well, that's good to know that you're not alone, but.
Yeah, for a long time, you know, I was very alone with all this information, Doreen. You know, like. Part of it was, for the first couple of years I started researching this stuff, I'm like, I don't think I'm being. It's like, you know, you start seeing these things and then you question your own sanity briefly. You're like, am I really seeing this? Am I really seeing this? So for a while I was kind of reluctant in sharing, and then I started, you know, putting out information on Twitter, and I started making some of the connections with like the intel agencies and some of the other things, and they shut down my Twitter account. I was like, okay, I'm over the target. I know what I'm putting out is accurate. And then I kind of escalated things when I sent a FOIA request to a 3-letter agency here in the United States, you know. And I've had, like, for every device, like every cellular phone I've had since then, like, I've had issues. I could hear chatter in the background on some conversations, you know. So I know I've attracted some bad people, you know. They don't scare me though, not in the least. But yeah, for a long time I was alone by myself with all this information, you know. And again, you know, I was just like, am I really seeing this? Am I reading too much into this? You know, so I had to, you know, share the information among friends, you know, that knew me well. And, you know, there again, you know, I've got some bias towards Maximus, of course. but in the realm of research, I want to remain as objective as possible. So just within the past, say, 2 years, I came across and have become very, very good friends with her and trust her implicitly. She actually worked for Maximus through the Veterans Enrollment Service that Maximus bought a couple of years ago. And we exchange information all the time, you know. So it's like, yeah, she's like, yes, you're spot on with this, you know. And I was like, oh my God, you know, thank you for confirming what nobody else could really give me a perspective on, you know, and like confirm the information, you know. So she's been tremendous, like, just, you know, for the mental stability part of all this, you know, which I think we all need, you know, because we see this stuff and it's like, it's really unbelievable.
I don't think any of us dreamed how corrupt our government and society have become. I don't know if it snuck up on the rest of you, but, you know, certainly I didn't walk into family court thinking anything except, oh, you know, these are people of very great integrity who are going to protect my children. And then my eyes were open to this world where nothing is like I thought it was. And I think it's actually, you know, almost like canaries in the coal mine, you know, for showing exactly how bad things can get. If is it okay if we ask for there's a couple of hands up in the question. Maria had her hand up again. I don't know if that was from before, but Nicolette's got their hand up. And
Yes, I put it up. I had a quick question about open source software. Because I recently learned that in United Nations there is an international telecommunication union, which is responsible for monitoring how the digitalization and public services is going in the member states of United Nations. So it's pretty wide list of countries. And there I learned that actually there are countries who are choosing consciously open source software to build public services. And there are overheads and sort of downsides of that from the money and budget perspective. But I was very surprised. Why would they want to go into the open source? Now you gave me the answers and the clues. So what's your opinion about open source? Can it be an alternative? Would this kind of software potentially allow to create a pathway to justice eventually?
I don't know. I don't have the tech ability to know. I don't think open source necessarily means low security. I think it depends on how your system is configured and whether you've put in security protocols and stuff. So I don't know, Jack or Doreen, whether you're sort of familiar enough with the tech side to answer that question.
I meant it's as a less corrupt platform, that's all, because it's not a commercial software. So
right.
Open source by definition is much harder to corrupt than the commercial providers of the software. From that perspective was my question. And yes, of course, the security question applies. It's implied there.
I don't know, that's an interesting public procurement question. Do you know, Jack, about open source, how much it's used?
Yeah, I'm not exactly the most tech savvy person in the world, you know. I don't even own a TV. But
it doesn't really matter which tech you're using if the corporation that's building the system continues to have access to the system, because a lot of times it does happen like that, like the Horizon scandal in the UK now, Fujitsu were running it, built it and were, I believe, running it for a long time. So they have these long-term contracts. But yeah, that is another issue, like, you know, when a system is using platforms like Amazon, for example, you know, certainly there could be security issues around that.
Yeah, it's you got to remember that all these systems, they always install a backdoor in the programming. Somebody somewhere has access to all this information every single time.
Often
That's a good point.
they've got lots of holes in them, and lots of very messy code that nobody understands.
Yeah, and the people designing these systems, they're highly intelligent, but they're also easily influenced. So they're going to have those protections built into the program. I know the goal, and I know that one of the major achievements is like, okay, and this come from Maximus also, the Hague Convention on child support. The Office of Central Child Support Enforcement in the United States is the central repository for all child support cases in the United States, okay? Through the Hague Treaty Convention, they are able to access that information in whatever country has signed onto that treaty. So they can literally track you, from state to state, from country to country. They can, and it doesn't take them long to locate you, believe me. I changed jobs once and didn't tell child support agency, the office here, and it was ran by Maximus at the time. Within 2 days of me changing jobs, they had located me. Within 2 days. I didn't do it intently, I wasn't trying to avoid, my quote unquote child support obligation. I'd left a job and found one very quickly thereafter, so I just continued working. But yeah, within 2 days, they knew everything about the company that I was working for. Maximus has the most used employer registry in the United States. So what I mean to say is all these systems are going to be working in unison to keep everybody in check, literally in check. They want nothing less than totalitarianism, and that's coming through the World Economic Forum, the UN, all these global agencies that really have no business in any country. It's the one world order, it's the beast, one of the beast systems mentioned in scripture. And I am not the most devout Christian, but I am a Christian, and I do believe what scripture says. I don't question that. And that's been a very important part for me, is having that perspective. My faith bolsters the research I'm doing, and I would encourage anybody, like, if you really get into all this stuff, we're keeping it light, but it gets very dark very quickly when we start understanding what these people are doing, in particular to children. We know some of the things,
I can agree with that, and they're going to use they're using the psychological stuff to get away with it, because I found some of their systems in some of the UN protocols for how we're gonna educate children about climate change and making the right choices for climate change, and somebody from India and somebody from Washington State in the US, and they're writing educational programs, and they use the whole, if we tell, I don't even know what they're telling children, but they can't use water, they have to conserve. Well, they're not going to believe that because they're going to have cognitive dissonance. Well, of course they are, because what you're telling them is stupid. And so we're going to use this educational program in school to teach them how not to question, basically, not to have this cognitive dissonance. And anyway, I get like, wow, this is unbelievable. I mean, the infiltration is stunning. But I guess if you don't start to pick it apart, you don't, nobody's going to find it. And certainly the news media is not going to tell us this is going on.
No, they don't want people to know that these databases exist. It's like, let's take, let's take Epstein, since has been pretty prominent, so then we take Epstein, we look at Maxwell, we look at Ghislaine Maxwell's sisters, in Gilead, and those databases that they created. Maximus has been funneling information into every one of those systems that have been created since the 70s. And they're doing the same thing in the UK through like MI6, through all the intel agencies in the UK. Same thing in Australia. That's where the military industrial complex foundations of many of these companies become very pertinent, because you start seeing how these things are arranged. And believe me, it's, I'm still learning, and it's taken me forever to be able to articulate what I know, so people don't look at me like I'm a crazy man. I mean, they still do, but it's got a little bit more backbone to it, when I'm able to articulate what I know.
May I interrupt, because Nicolette has had her hand raised patiently. Nicolette, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, I just wanted to ask from all of you, how could we connect the dots? Because it seems, or we all of us saying literally the same thing, that nothing is as it looks. And there is an underlying system. There is an underlying system in all fields of life, like a tunnel, the Hack-Child Abduction Convention, the observations, the outsourcing. So how can we connect with each other the dots? That's my main question.
Do you want to start with your case? I start with the local people, the people that I'm involved with. And then I read you can read their biographies. Where are they coming from? What foundation are they standing on? Who are the groups that are associated with? If it's a social work, they might have a curriculum vitae where they say their training or what trainings they've given. That then you kind of look for the connections between them and the government or any other agency. And the funny thing is, the more that you learn, you one day you wake up and say, wow, I actually understand this, and it all connects. And I didn't, when somebody had asked me for the AFCC information, and then I realized, wow, I really understand this. So you have to pick at it. And if you start from a bottom level, and you will get scared, you're going to come up against some stuff that's shocking.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great way to do that, Doreen, because that's how I think most of us started, is like, because there's a few people I follow that teach like commercial law, and then, but usually every one of us have had some sort of personal experience, either like, so you get a traffic ticket, right? So that'll lead you to like studying traffic laws, so generally speaking, I think every one of us have experienced something as individuals that led us to start researching this stuff. But I think it's exactly what you said, Doreen. You start with what happened to you, and then you start local.
Look for their connections, businesses, marriages, girlfriends. It's odd.
Yeah, I started looking at the careers and where these people who run these companies were educated. You start looking at these universities, their employment careers. That'll teach you a lot. And always check to see if they have military involvement. Always, that's one of the things I've had to become more astute about for me. I'm like, I hit a wall with a lot of the Maximus research, and then I started looking at the military, and I was like, okay, there we go. That's what I was looking for,
You have to learn the language.
Yeah.
I say I know the code. Now I don't do the technical, and I learned from other people on that. Jack's done a ton of work, but there is a language. Like he said, the words are not what they say they are. There's a double.
Yes, absolutely.
You have to be suspicious. And that's terrible of me to say. I don't want to convince people not to trust, but you have to question what, they'll often try to, you have to do this, you have to go there, and you have to this, that, like it's going to solve the problem, but it's not. They're not legitimate people. And I find the ones who are decent are covering up for something much bigger that they know about.
Nicolette's her hand up again. Nicolette, do you want to ask?
Yes, thank you, Jack and Doreen. I think it's so important what you say about the words. Sorry, I was not on camera. I put myself so you can see me. I'm not invisible. So I think the words, when you capture the words, for instance, we're talking about abducted children by primary caregivers, and we realized with Natalie, according to primary European Union law, which has priority over the Child Abduction Convention, there is no such thing that the primary caregiver is abducting the child. It's nonsensical, bullshit. And when you read the research, what they are writing, the lawyers, legal nonsense, and they get millions of EU funding for legal nonsense. Universities, what they are writing, bullshit, absolutely bullshit. For instance, in the EU, they're talking about abducting mothers. Primary caregivers cannot abduct the child according to primary European Union law, because it is nonsensical, nonsensical. And they are literally criminalizing thousands of parents without no legal basis in the EU. And if you start with the words, you realize that they are lying.
Can I share one interesting moment? When I met Roly in the Netherlands in October, and we were standing in front of the place where they were holding a big conference of the Hague Conference on Private International Law, which administrates these, Hague conventions, and it was held in a beautiful building called the Peace Palace. And inside there is the Academy of Private International Law and the International Court of Justice, which is the highest of the UN. And Roly, who she and her former colleague at anti-child trafficking charity, they said to me that I was the first person that they'd met who said the Hague Convention is illegitimate.
Absolutely.
And she stood in front of this building. We were looking up at it, and she said, "This is the biggest gaslighting trick ever played on humanity."
Yes,
because this organization is given its legitimacy by this grand old building and by the UN, which it's nestled underneath and historically connected with, but actually is a total, I don't know about all of its conventions, but certainly when it comes to the family law ones, it's a fraud, isn't it?
I mean, all Hague conventions are incompatible already with the UN conventions, and so all Hague conventions are legal fiction. It's nonsensical. It's nonsense what they write, that the child has to be brought back always to the place where the child used to live. But people must escape from war, from poverty, and according to EU law, primary law treaties, they are entitled to have a better life within the EU. And they are literally coercing people to remain in poverty in the EU.
On Facebook, I saw this Croatian woman who'd come back to Croatia after a relationship broke up, and she got, hit by the Hague Convention, and all of these people were saying, "But what do you mean? Of course you can leave and come back with your child. Everybody's in disbelief, but all of these lawyers gaslighting you into going, oh yes, you know, sort of to, you know, and this is the thing about language as well, you know.
Yes.
What we call abduction now was at one time called kidnap, you know, so if your child was actually kidnapped, you can't get them back because now it's a civil offence instead of a criminal one, and rather than getting the police and Interpol after them, you have to go to the civil courts and pay a lawyer and play Russian roulette with whether the judge will actually apply the law or not. Whoa. Yeah.
Yeah. If you look at language lately, okay, grammar is derived from the word grimoire. You know, the language that the bar uses, that all these attorneys and lawyers use. The Jesuits pretty much, you know, control all of that, but these are ancient languages that they're using literally for spell casting, you know, spelling, you know. That's a simplistic way of saying that, but the legal profession, if you, it pains me to even say that, but the legal profession deals with entities, dead entities. That's why when you're called to court, you know, just one little example, you know, they say all rise. They're calling forth your spirit, you know, in essence, all rise, you know, because you're your legal person is a dead corporate entity, you know, so they're, I can't articulate that better, but that's corporation, corpse, mortgage, mort, dead, you know, so they're dealing with all these ancient languages that were founded based in death. So over the centuries, they've, you know, over the millennia, they've just evolved the language to fit the time, more or less. So I guess a better example, what, you know, look up Bouvier's Law Dictionary or Black's Law Dictionary, and that'll help explain what I'm trying to articulate much better than I can right now. But language is all important to these people, because it's all right. Let's go back to I'll use this in scripture. Lucifer influenced Eve through language.
Yes.
In the garden. So that's one example. God called into the creation of the universe and everything through his voice, you know, in Genesis. It's an inversion. All this stuff is an inversion of what God created, to me. You know, and I've heard that referred to by many people. So we have the spiritual aspect of all these things, you know, that we have to really observe, I think. These I've seen some of the worst things from people involved in, I wouldn't even call them people, I would call them demons. There's no way in my mind that a human being can think of children and do the things that these children, that we know they do, and be human. There's no way.
Right. I will. Yep.
So, you know, there's some areas I won't talk about, you know, because it's just, I mean, it's still traumatizing me, some of the things I've seen, you know.
I try not to.
Yeah. I mean,
get too into the dark. It's very dark. One of the odd pieces I have, I collect odd AFCC. So they put out this piece. AFCC is allowed to credential the practitioners. So they, at their conferences, so they put out this, if you want to do a conference workshop, here are the words that you should use to be in line with the credentialing. And I have all the words. It's pretty funny, you know.
Yeah, you know, and you know, if you can go to your local courts, you know, and sit in on cases if they're, you know, if it's publicly
No,
available.
thank you.
Yeah. I try to avoid that too, but like you can listen to these lawyers and attorneys speak, and it's a language really only known to them, you know. That you can, like I said, you can grab a Bouvier's or a Black's Law Dictionary and learn some of it, but some things are only taught at law school. You know, you're not going to hear. And
if we found, in our opinion, it was a show. My friend called it like a B-rate movie. They were all acting. Like the judge would say, "Oh, don't you have any more evidence?" And she got caught. "Oh, no, that's all I had," because she's so stupid she couldn't actually present a case, you know. And it was these little, well, what are you going to say? And I also noticed that if there were a lot of security guards around, then I knew. So the one time I was panicking because they would put me in jail also. And I realized there are no security guards, you know, one. And when I would go in there and there'd be 8, and they stand right next to me and they'd be ready to jump at you the minute you opened your mouth.
yeah,
You have to observe the body language of what the players are doing too, because it's kind of like they're putting on a show to make you believe that what is occurring is legitimate. And it's not. At least that's how I viewed it. But maybe there's people who have legitimate cases. I don't know. But people that reach out to me don't have. And when I tell them, no, this is a criminal organization. And then she's like, "Oh, I'm so afraid of offending the judge." I'm like, the judge is a criminal. What are you afraid of? But not everybody's willing to stand up to them.
You know, I'd tell any of those people, you know, now I'd be like, "The hell with you! Like, I know what you're about. You know, you're fleecing people. You're making money off the children. You know, you deserve to be in hell."
My friend says she tells them, "Just get away from me. Leave me alone. Don't mess with me."
I sometimes thought she's got condemned notices on these buildings, and they're just dropped in the chat. Bandy X-Lee calls the family courts organized crime cartels. Yes. Yeah, it's accurate. And this is the thing. I mean, if we would get the word out about this,
you can let her ask a question again.
Yeah, go ahead, Nicolette. Yeah.
I just wanted to tell you that in Hungary, I live now again in Hungary, and there is already a criminal proceeding against the former Deputy Minister of Justice and against very high-ranking people in, I don't know how to say, the court executors, those lawyers who execute judgments, you know, and they are all criminally, there is a criminal organization, so there is now a criminal proceeding running. Many people are already in prison. So we see already in Hungary that the bar and the Ministry of Justice and those who execute judgments are all involved. And the funny thing is, you know, what's happened? I inherited from my father a 1/3 house. And my aunt is a former judge, a retired judge, and she wants my part anyway. And she made an execution order on my 1/3, but only not bar payment, but she said, "I want her part." So the executor's office should have sent me a warning. "She wants your part." But instead of this, they sent me a warning that I must pay $40,000 cash in 5 days. Otherwise, they break into my apartment where I live with my mom. I am already asset stripped, so I have nothing, and they can take anything. So a lawyer friend of mine ran to court and say, "This is a crime. She doesn't have to pay cash." But if he would not have recognized it, they would have broken into my apartment and they would have taken everything, even from my mom. And then the court, and then they said, "Oh, it was a bug in the system." You know what I mean? So officially they should give you a paper that you are own money and you are responsible to pay it back with your part in the house. But they say it's a bug in the system and they take everything from you if you don't realize it, because they change it into cash payment.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? It's crazy, but they break, and now many people are in prison because of this. But because of, if you are not aware, they can take anything from you. Can you imagine, Natalie? They can break into the apartment with police where you live by other people, and they can take other people's stuff. And then you need to go to court and prove that it was not there. So that's total asset stripping.
Yeah, lots of really, really mad stuff like that.
And we could avoid this kind of asset stripping. I could avoid because my lawyer friend ran to the court immediately, and the court corrected it within 1 day.
Yeah, I mean,
so
is it true? Do you think it's a bug, or do you think that somebody is messing around?
Tell me.
Do you think it really is a bug, or that somebody is...
No, of course it was not a bug. Of course, there is no such thing. Everybody knows there's no such thing that you are responsible for a debt with the part of your property, or that you are responsible with cash payment. There's no such thing. All other lawyers said to me, there's not a bug in the system. Of course, there is no such thing like bug. They try to get money because the executor would have got 600,000 forints from this. You know, it's about a few $1,000 immediate payment plus the stuff they take.
We've got some really serious problems with the justice system as a whole.
They don't respect property. They don't respect property in Hungary. And in the same way, they take children. And in the EU now, the thing is, neither property nor family life is secured in Europe, for instance. So with this new Brussels, with this new EU regulation, Natalie, the EU 2019-1111 regulation, if a court makes a judgment and gives it, for instance, to the other parent, the custody, you live in a different member state, the police can come and take the child immediately. And we don't know what's happening to a residence of the child is. So actually, court corruption is thriving. They make a judgment and the police comes next day and picks up the child in other member states, and you cannot protest.
Yeah, I know that very well. Yeah.
So we have no legal certainty concerning property. We have no legal certainty concerning our children. So they can take anything. The only thing which matters if you speak up.
Yeah.
I'll call them, I'll refer to them as the state, right? And that would be any country, but it's not exclusive to the U.S. The state wants everybody on welfare. They want everybody dependent on them. So then they can take your children. They can take your property. And this is what we saw in World War II with Hitler, I think one of his quotes was something to the effect of, as long as we declare the child the most precious asset or something to that of the country, there's pretty much no atrocity that a parent won't endure, right? That's not the best way, I know that's not the entirety of the quote, but
it might be
that's one way to manipulate parents, is to use the children against the parents, and that's
to take the child away, you mean?
Yeah.
Jack, you mean that they threaten you to take the child away?
I think that's what they want to do, and it's that they're trying to strip parents, every parent, of their God-given natural rights.
Yes.
And they're again, they want to be able to control people, and they will use whatever means they have to their end, and I think a big part of that is what we're seeing with with the family court system, through children, through welfare. They have all these mechanisms in place, and to do that, and that's, like I've had people ask, like, where, well, this, so where is the remedy? How do you fight back? I'm like, the first thing is to be even aware that these things exist. Most people don't
Yes.
even know about Maximus, and that's just one tiny part of all
Yeah,
this.
I didn't know.
Like,
Can I just share with you that I've spoken to a researcher and mothers in Germany who confirm everything that you say. They found the same things, everything.
Oh, in Germany, they take the children from wealthy parents, from wealthy middle-class parents, and you must pay for the state so they sustain the child. And you never know if your child is going to back from school or not. It's called the Jugendamt, the Child Protection Service. They are like an army, and they take from loving, fantastic parents the child without any reason, and then you must pay thousands of euros for the state to sustain your child in state custody. And you never know when your child is coming back from school or not. And Germany doesn't let also parents homeschool their children. It's a violation of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and Hungary no neither. So you must always see, can I homeschool my child? Because if you cannot homeschool your child, now it's already going very, very bad. Because homeschooling must be a parental right. Because if you homeschool your child, I also partially homeschooled my own child. He's now an adult. But if you can homeschool your child, you have control over your child's mind. Jack, you agree? You can do whatever you put good seeds into your child's mind.
I think there is no better teacher for a child than
yes, like the parent,
child's parent. Yeah.
Yes, or the grandparent. Yes,
the
one. Parent or the grandparent. So my mom, I grew up in communism. My parents didn't let me go into the kindergarten until I was 6. So the funny thing is, I was so intelligent, my ground teacher said, I should not have gone to school until 12. I was not a genius child. I was just not, we didn't have TV, and I was homeschooled until I was 6. And I had the school level of 12 with 6. You know what I mean? So yeah. They don't want this. They don't want this.
They don't want you out of their grasp. They want a chokehold on everyone.
Sorry, I didn't hear you, Jack. Tell me.
They don't want people. They don't want parents to raise their children outside of their system.
Yes. Yes, and that's the whole transgender thing and the threat of parents through schools. So Natalie, if we could do with Jack and with Doreen and with other interested people, oppression through the school system, this social transitioning of children's threat, forbidden of homeschooling. This is very important. It's part of the oppression through the school system. And it starts already with the sexualization of children in the kindergarten. And it is very bad. My country, my home country, Hungary, doesn't allow NGOs into schools. They don't want early sexual education, but forbids also homeschooling because they want to control what they put in the child's mind. You know what I mean? So they don't want EU supported NGOs early sexualization, but they also don't allow homeschooling. So you see, it's a fight for the child's mind.
It really is, because they know as we do that our children and our children's children, that's the future. And
yes, absolutely.
They want to control every aspect of that.
They want to control, yes, and through the child especially.
Yes.
Through education and also through vaccination and medical system, and
if that's the danger of hospitals, right? And I'm not saying that hospitals don't serve a purpose, and that they don't help people, but when you know that medical information that you're giving to your doctor, to your child's doctor, should be in confidence, and it's not, and it's being sold and used against you ultimately, and against your child, you have to question, just what the hell is going on, There's a researcher, she's a nurse, and I picked up one of her books. I don't know if you can all see this.
Make it smaller, Jack.
Oh, Big Brother in the exam room.
Oh God, that must be a good book.
I would highly recommend anybody picking this book up and reading it. Her name is Twyla Brace. She's based in the United States.
Vonalban vagyok.
But
Ne ordítsál.
yeah, that book is very eye-opening, you know, and she really dissects how everything works. She was the first person I read anything from about Maximus being involved with Obamacare and those databases. Incredibly intelligent woman. Speak very highly of her, think very highly of her. So I'm trying to, you know, some of the authors, you know, I'm trying to reach out to too, you know. I've got my niche, you know, and they have theirs, you know, and I think we should all do that too, you know. Trying to learn everything I can about this. Just, I don't know how else to say it. Shitstorm. But yeah, you know, and the thing about the birth certificate, you know, like you start studying that, we're talking about the Vatican, you know, who controls the Vatican. The Jesuits control the Vatican. Some of these things that we study are ancient, but they've hidden it from us for so long. You know, that's why education is so important to me, you know.
Yeah.
So it's just it's constantly learning.
You know, I'm wondering whether sort of people might want to wrap up because it's quite late here in the UK. I've got another 10-hour stint tomorrow.
Yes, I
goodness,
am
Matt,
wrapping
yeah.
up, and I will connect tomorrow when I get up and get settled. And thank you. I appreciate meeting everybody, and thank you for the opportunity. And if you're up against this, you need to balance this with some kind of rest time or outdoor time or something. I want you to keep yourself safe also. And it's not a small thing.
Very wise words, Doreen, and thank you. I've really enjoyed this really kind of quite nice and relaxed but super interesting conversation this evening. So thank you both so much for contributing your time. Thank you, everybody,
people
today. And tomorrow it's going to be fascinating. 10 o'clock in the morning to women will be speaking out about child sexual abuse in the family courts. We'll be talking about financial matters in the family courts, the Hague Convention, the Irish mother and baby homes, which were one of the earliest instances, but probably not the earliest instances, but earliest identified instance of the trafficking of children. The family courts as the modern slave trade, and then 3 hours of community workshops at the end of the day. So if you'd like to come together and talk about, you know, how we could change things in terms of what the future of these systems and services should look like and how we can get there. So there'll be 2 sessions like that, which will be very much about us interacting as a community. So if you are able to join tomorrow, that would be great. But other than that, let's do this again. You know, there's no limit to how many times we can do this, and all sorts of different ideas that we can have for stuff to do and conversations to have. So let's make it a tradition, but not for too long, because we want to get this stuff fixed.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie, and thank you everyone that's like, you know.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you, everybody. Yeah.
It's been so nice to meet you. Really great.
Yeah, I'm so glad to be making, you know, not just connections but friends, you know. And It means a lot. So
Sounds like you need them. So
yeah, you know, we all do, you know.
this is true. You get the virtual hug.
Yeah,
Thank
it's
you.
good to
All
it's
of
good
you do.
pull my head out of the research for a while, you know, and have human interaction.
Go for a walk.
Yeah, I've got my dogs, you know, but they don't respond much. So, but yeah, thank you. And like, if anybody wants to reach out, you know, Natalie knows how